Well, looks like it's already 1 o'clock. I'll give a couple more minutes for a couple others to join us all, and then I'll do a quick round of have everybody introduce themselves briefly. I think I can see the participant list, so I think what I will do is call out your name, and then you can do a quick introduction, so it's not a free for all. Otherwise. Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started, and I'll go through. I'll have everybody just give a brief introduction of your name and what organization you're with, and I'll call people out your name so that we just kind of go in order. So I'm Brian Dunn. I manage the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit for the Oregon DOT, and I chair the Oregon Modeling Steering Committee. Carol?
Oh, Carol Richardson, contract facilitator for the OMSC.
I'm Becky Knudsen with ODOT's Transportation Planning Analysis Unit, and I work for Brian.
Thank you. Jeff?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Fracanja, Metro's Research Center Director and the current OMSC Vice Chair.
Thank you, Jeff. Adam?
Hi all, I'm Adam Argo. I'm out of Statewide Transportation Planning Unit, colleagues at TPALS, and I'm a presenter today, so not a normal OMSC member, just to clarify.
All right, thank you for joining us, Adam. Steve?
Hey, I'm Steve Dobernich. I'm a transportation planner at the Corvallis area MPO.
Thank you. Eric?
I'm Eric Main. I'm with the Oregon Health Authority within the Public Health Division, and I'm going to have to jump off for about 15 minutes around 1:30 or so, but I'll try not to be a disruption.
Thank you. Tyler?
Tyler Diekey, with the Bend MPO.
Liming?
Leming Wang. I'm with Portland State University. I'm also the coordinator for OMAG with Kyle and Joe, I think.
Right. Garth?
Garth Aponitis with DKS Associates.
All right, welcome. Cindy?
I'm Cindy Pedersen, and I'm with the Analytics Division of the Research Center at Metro.
All right. Chris?
Chris Johnson. I'm with the Research Center at Metro, and I manage the modeling and forecasting group there.
All right. Alex?
Alex Bernardi ODOT. Work with Transportation Planning Analysis Unit.
Catherine?
Hi, I'm Catherine Rohan. I'm with the Albany area MPO, and this is my first OMSC meeting. So it's nice.
All right,
to
welcome.
meet you all. Thank you.
Glad you could join us. Kelly?
Hi, Kelly Clark with the Central Line MPO.
Mark?
Mark Bradley with RSG.
Ray?
Ray Jackson with the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments.
Cody?
Hey everybody, Cody Meyer, planner with Department of Land Conservation and Development.
All right, Mike?
Mike Jaffe with the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments.
Nick?
Hey, Nick Forty with the Federal Highway Administration.
Let's see. Steve? Kelly?
Steve Kelly, Washington County Long Range Transportation Planning.
All right, welcome. Joel?
Hi, Joel Friedman with RSG.
Okay, did I, Jeffrey? looks like he might just be connecting.
And then Mark Harrington.
Mark Harrington, right.
Yeah, Mark.
Mark Harrington with
Very
RTC, Vancouver, Washington MPO.
So the participant list is bouncing around on me. So if I miss someone, Wes, I see you're, well, Jeffrey, I see you're on.
Yes, I am.
Jeffrey Stockham with DQ. Wes, looks like Wes is connecting up and he's with DQ as well. And I see one phone number. Is there someone on the phone that I haven't called on yet?
I think it's me.
Okay.
This is Tara Widener from ODOT Climate Office as well.
All right. Thanks, Tara. Did I miss anyone else? All right. Well, welcome everybody. Glad you could all join us, especially those who are presenting today. And some of you I know have only been to one or two of these meetings. So I appreciate everybody joining. Let's go through the first thing we have here is the list of conferences and living in the interesting times that we do. We'll see how many of these happen, how many happen online versus in person, et cetera, over the course of the next year. You can see here we have the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations annual conference is coming up, and that's going to be online. If anyone wants to say anything or has any input on these, just feel free to and let me know, and I'll let you say something about those. Zephyr, there's multiple dates for Zephyr events. I'm sure many of you get those. If not, you can probably touch base with Alex Bettinardi and he can let you know about those. International Conference of Transportation Planning and Congestion Reduction is coming up in December. Then we have the TRB annual meeting. That's going to be the 100th meeting, and that's moved to totally online. So I know they're going through registration now, and early registration for some folks that ends in November. So you might want to check that out. I don't think there's a detailed agenda on that one yet. And I haven't heard if their plan is to stretch that out a bit more than what we see here, but just be aware of that. Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, the 2021 Tools and Training Symposium is in May. Looks like currently still scheduled for Fort Lauderdale, but we'll see if that happens or if it goes online. The Planning Applications Conference, I think that was in Portland a couple of years ago, right? And I know a few people have been, I know Becky, you've been helping with that. I'm not sure if Peter's been helping with that this time around or not, but
yeah, Peter Bosa is actually the conference chair, and I'm taking his role he had last time as the program chair. We are going to release the call for abstracts next week, so we're moving forward. Great. And there hopefully we'll have a live link for you very soon.
Great, yeah. And if you see things here or in the subcommittee meetings that you could encourage people to apply to put some presentation papers in. The Conference on Sustainability and Emerging Transportation, scheduled for next summer in Irvine. And then the Transportation Conference that's freight forecasting related is in September of next year. And then the Innovations and Freight Data would be, I'm assuming that's September 21 to 23 of next year as well. Do we miss anybody that wants to share any other conferences that are coming up?
This Mark, there's one supposed to be in Utrecht in the Netherlands in a few weeks, but now it's online. It's called the Big Survey Conference. And let's see, RSG has a couple presentations, one on data privacy and one on fusion, smartphone surveys and fusion of passive and active data.
Mark, can you send me a link if there is one for that conference?
Okay, yeah, I'll try to find it.
Yeah, that'd be great to send a link out to the committee, Carol.
There is the Whistler conference symposium on transportation and land use research. That's August 9th to 13th next year here in Portland. Anyone interested in submitting a paper, I think the submission deadline is January 15th. Kelly Clifton and Jennifer Deal are two of the organizers of the conference. So it was postponed from this year. It's supposed to last June, but somehow due to COVID, it was postponed by 1 year.
I see. Thank you.
Could you also send me that link, Liming, if there is one?
I also wanted to just mention that there's a series of peer MPOs webinars that are going on right now that the Maricopa Council or Association of Governments is hosting. And so there have been a lot of presentations from MPOs around the country, mainly focused on data, information sharing, collaboration. So I can send you the link. They're posting those online as well.
Great, thank you.
And Brian,
Yes.
the Society for Decision Making Under Deep Uncertainty is having their annual meeting November 10th through 12th. It's all online. It's $50. Not a lot of transportation, but there are some, if you're interested in decision making under deep uncertainty, if you've been paying attention to EMAT, you might find something of interest there.
Great, thank you. Okay, if anyone thinks of any others, just please send a note to Carol along with a link to the information, and then she can get that out to the entire committee. So I appreciate the input. Okay.
Yeah, I can add that
yes.
big survey conference is free, so that's.
Oh, great! Hey.
Oh.
Okay, under general business, approval of minutes from last meeting. I think that was on tax day this year, if I remember right, April 15th, 2020, somewhat tax day. I guess it got pushed back, but I've taken a look at those, and hopefully people had a chance to read through those and get Carol any corrections. Does anyone have any questions or corrections for Carol on those minutes from that April 15th meeting? Okay, if not, does somebody want to move to approve the April 15th, 2020 meeting minutes?
I move to accept the meeting minutes. Sorry.
Okay. Becky?
Second. I'll second.
Chris.
This is Chris. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Second by Chris. All in favor? I guess you could either, I don't think do we have a hand raising option on? Yeah, you could just do a thumbs up for me if you, or if anyone has any issues with it, let me know. And Carol, I'm assuming you can see it looks like I don't have any thumbs down, so we'll consider that to be approved.
Thumbs up here, but I don't see how people are doing that. Where is the thumbs up?
Reactions? Yeah, your happy smiley face.
Oh, yeah. Got it.
I like the meeting management. There is no thumbs down option, so.
Only, yeah, we disabled that, so no. Okay, so this being a meeting we have twice a year, the next one will be just after tax day, so April 21st, 2021. So make sure you get that on your calendars early. All right, let's move into our various subcommittee updates. Becky, you want to give an update on the MPC?
Yeah. So Carol, you have slides?
Yeah, I'm working on getting them up here. Hang on one second.
Okay, because that, without slides, I'll just go off on all kinds of tangents and you will. So
okay.
The MPC just met this morning and finished up at noon. And the purpose of this committee, it's a standing committee. It's been around a long time and it's not going to go away. And it's our job to provide that that technical aspect and work together to handle issues and get the most done with our scarce resources as a team. We meet before this full meeting twice a year, and then we also have a intermediate meeting that we have if there's enough to cover. So we meet about 4 times a year on average, and it's mainly the modeling staff and the people who rely on modelings that come together. Pretty open though to different participants. Today we had a lot of good input on the research side from Josh Roll, who's now a standing member, and it's really nice to have him on board. OHCS. Oh, is that OHAS? No, who is that? OHCS. Oregon
Housing Community
Oh, that was that's right. That was a June meeting. I'm sorry. I'm in today's meeting in my head. So we did hear about progress made in response to House Bill 2003, requiring an estimate of housing needs and then forecasting it out into the future. And they have some interim deliverables, and there's going to be some more work done. And I believe we'll hear more about this in the future when there's more to share.
I think actually later today, Becky. I think
Is it today?
they're on our
Okay.
agenda. Yeah.
Okay. We had a very short update on the connected and automated vehicles work. There wasn't a whole bunch of new information, but we're just keeping tabs on that every time we meet. And then Alex gave us an update on the TMIP EMAT activity, testing the travel demand models. Josh Roll shared information on his interaction with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, where we're trying to find common areas of interest and get some research proposals funded. I guess the maiden voyage attempt did not compete as well because there's limited resources, but that's not going to stop us from reapplying for other research projects in the future. And we also saw a demo of ODOT's new traffic monitoring website and the software. And we will be all using that together, hopefully having the ability to accept data from non-ODOT partners so that we can represent the full network in the future, but it'll take some time to work through that. And again, earlier today, we learned more about TMIP EMAT activity from Alex and using the Southern Oregon activity-based model. We had a discussion, a pretty lengthy discussion about all of the issues that are kind of revealing themselves through this COVID-19 period, especially things related to telecommuting and e-commerce. And are some of these behavioral changes going to stay around and stick, or are they going to subside, or is there going to be something in between? We typically get our behavioral data through travel surveys that are conducted about every 10 years. Very, very challenging to get those things together because they're so expensive. But an event like COVID really shows us that collecting data every 10 years is becoming less and less helpful because our models need to be ready to analyze topics, emerging things and trends quickly. I mean, much more quickly than every 15 years or so, because it takes time to process the survey data and integrate it into our models. So we've got a lot of different challenges ahead of us, trying to figure out how to keep our models relevant and do it in a timely and affordable fashion. So it was a very good discussion, and we expect to have more discussion in the future. We worked through our annual inventory update of all the MPO models, and ODOT models, and what is planned for future work. And we really look for common interests so we can pool our funds together and collaborate, save some money and time. And there was a short discussion on just planning for the work we're going to do and making sure that there's resources represented in the UPWPs. Let's see, the next meeting will probably end up being more like February, because I'm not sure, but the more I hear from TRB, they may be spreading out the annual meeting more than just a week or two. They may be spreading it out over the whole month. They're trying to figure all that out still. So we'll probably just meet in February. And I know OMUG is also interested in having a follow-up to the TRB meeting. So that depends on how they handle it. We talked a lot about potential research projects, and we will continue that and also learn more about land use modeling, especially with LCOG. And now that the OMSC Freight Subcommittee no longer exists because it met its objective, we need to check in with the action items and figure out how to move forward with that list of activity. Just pick it off one by one. And then one more thing that's on our list to do is to discuss kind of a mentoring framework. It may be beyond our resources, but it's still something we want to visit and think about and decide what to do, or just choose not to do anything. So I think that's it for me. And Alex.
Yep, thank you, Becky. Alex, you want to give an update for the technical tools subcommittee?
Yeah, for those new to the group, the technical tools subcommittee is a group where we're able to create kind of ad hoc discussions as needed related to the technical tools that this group operates, or transportation tools. So yeah, it's kind of an assortment of different topics, which you'll see as I talk about what we're working on. If you want to move forward, Carol. So the last 6 months, one of the things we're working on is a count program to supplement the survey, household survey that was on hold as COVID hit. And so we're still kind of in a holding pattern, but we anticipate something will start there, well, possibly in 2021. I guess no guarantees. We'll see how that works out. You heard the acronym Team at BMAT a handful of times when Becky was talking about our reports back to the MPC. Just to note, I guess, that as we wrapped up the work we did with the ABM with Team at BMAT, which is a wrapper for any tool, it basically lets you do kind of thousands of scenarios with only running a dozen scenarios for any tool. So it's an exploratory process. And so as we did that with the ABM to get kind of a full sense for how policy and technology changes might play out, and we wrote a white paper. And as we did that, and we were staging the next series of tests, we decided that for these emerging tech conversations, and emerging tech is a conversation that's occurring underneath the tech tools group, we were going to start a living findings table. And so as part of that Team at BMAT work, we've started to develop a findings table that will be continuing to push everything that we learn around emerging technology into that table. So then the emerging tech group is continuing its work. We have a conversation right now with Volpe. They're supporting system dynamics modeling with the emerging, or with the technical tools group. We are planning on doing the next round of exploratory modeling with either the trip-based model or Vision Eval. And then we're working on putting together some research statements and reviewing research outside of our state as well, our group of state as well. So that's what kind of happened over the past 6 months. And then looking ahead, like I mentioned, continuing to look for when it makes sense to reestablish the modeling count program, continuing the emerging tech conversation, continuing to test Team at BMAT. We're going to stand up an OMSC group underneath tech tools to kind of review and guide the development of MCE as we deploy it with ABM. Right now, MCE, which stands for Multi-Criteria Evaluation Toolkit, is a tool that Metro has linked with their 4-step trip-based model. And so ODOT has desired to link it to the ABM that's currently in use. And we would like to make sure that that is that process, because it's really a travel demand model post-processor as opposed to a tool of its own. And so we want to make sure that the processing of the travel demand model outputs is QC'd through this group. And so we're standing that group up. In preparation for the Oregon Transportation Plan, we've been doing some house cleaning to make sure that our tools have consistent future reference assumptions, so that we have a common starting point across Vision Eval and the statewide model and HERS for testing future technologies and scenarios for the Oregon Transportation Plan. And so we've started to document our decisions or our plans forward with those assumptions, and we want to QC those through the OMSC. And so I'm just now trying to figure out if that is a common group or if it's really a different group underneath tech tools for each assumption, because things like CPI, consumer price index, might have a different review team than auto operating cost, which might have a different review team than truck operating costs, which might have a different review team than value of time or income assumptions. Anyways, I think they're all slightly different people, probably. So got to think through that. I was originally assuming I'd just be standing up one group, but it could be like 10 groups. So I got to think through that. And then we want to start having a really concerted effort towards creating common model development guidance. And so ODOT is kind of gearing up to try and get some contracting support for that, and anything we do would be done through the OMSC. So we're planning on doing that, and then facilitating any peer reviews as needed. I guess the one thing I didn't put on here that I'd like to mention is I don't think we've fully figured out how to bring it back to the OMSC, but ODOT sits on the activity sim group, and since I'm the rep there, I've kind of been informally bringing it back through tech tools, and so I'm planning on continuing to bring that through tech tools. It's just whenever OMSC needs updates on activity sim, we'll serve that role. I think I'm done, Carol.
Great. Any questions for Alex from anyone?
Yeah, this is Jeff. Alex, could you just give us a sentence or two on where Activity Sim is as a program right now? What's the status?
Sure. I was just setting up a call actually for Metro and SCATS and ODOT to, put some thought together. And I've been trying to think about, well, what is my summary there? So we have Atlanta and Detroit both moving forward with full activity sim implementations, like not just kind of like beta testing stand up, but like full, that is their model. I guess we have RSG on the call. They might know exact timelines better than myself. So that'll be interesting to watch. It hasn't quite hit version 1 yet. I guess my caution would be, don't jump in until we get to V1 at least. I think ODOT is probably planning on hitting like a V2. I don't know, is that enough sentences?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, this is Chris, Jeff, and Alex. I think, now that we've taken delivery of, an initial ABM implementation, it's, the SO ABM implementation, I think the time, we're sort of kind of, trying to figure out what our next steps are. And, activity sim is certainly, high on that list of next steps. I think it's, the time is right to sort of figure out a game plan, an Oregon game plan for this thing. So, so yeah, thanks for setting that up, Alex. We need to chat a little bit more and coordinate, I think, on the activity sim side of this thing and where we're headed.
Great, and it's not exclusive. Anyone else that wants to be a part of that, just let me know. But currently it's ODOT, Metro, and SCATS.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Joel, just chiming in here. MWCOG is also implementing Activity Sim, and the SimCog version is the same as the MTC Travel Model 1 version, so it's a bit different than the Southern Oregon and Metro versions of CT Ramp. It's a zone-based implementation, not a microzone-based implementation. So it doesn't quite have all the spatial features that the ABMs that are being used in Oregon have. But the SimCog version's up and running. So it is a working model. It's a pretty faithful implementation of Travel Model 1. The 3-zone system that would be more consistent with your models is under development now and should be done by the end of the year.
Joel, what region does MWCOG cover?
That's the Washington, D.C. MPO.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And thank you for the questions and the follow-up information from everyone. I appreciate it. All right, Chris, how about an update on the travel survey subcommittee?
Okay, thanks, Brian. Okay, for those who are new to this group, we've got a travel survey subcommittee. It's an ad hoc subcommittee charged with essentially implementing the next Oregon Household Travel Survey or Activity Survey. It's been a while since the full subcommittee has met, but a core group of us have been meeting on a fairly regular basis over the last several months to keep the effort moving forward. So that core group is Becky Knudsen, Kelly Clark, and Carol, and myself. And so I'm pleased to report that we are very, very close to the finish line in terms of having a finalized RFP that we would like to release. And when I say close to the finish line, I mean end of week. And so the goal would be for the RFP to be out in public, sometime in October. With sort of, proposal preparation, consultant selection occurring over the next couple of months. And the idea would be that we would have a contract in place with the consultant and a notice to proceed sometime in January. So that's really, really great news. So backing up to the RFP. So once we sort of dot the I's and cross the T's on the finalized RFP, what is going to happen is I will send out a memo to the travel survey subcommittee saying this is indeed the case right now, and ask for volunteers to serve on the actual consultant selection committee. So for those of you who are on the subcommittee, there's a heads up. And so if you are interested in serving in that capacity, definitely let me know after you see the memo. And so in terms of the timeline, like I said, the way this is going to work is that we hope to have the consultant on board and starting work on what we're calling sort of a scoping phase. And Becky sort of ticked off all the things that we're going to need to think about as we're designing and scoping out a travel survey effort, over the next few years, and trying to implement it over the next few years. But we're hoping that the scoping effort, is going to essentially take place for the better part of 9 to 12 months. So we would have some sort of game plan, if you will. I've been calling it a game plan in place, around this time next year, with the idea that we would be in the field as early, as spring of, I guess it would be 2022 at that point. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, but that would be great if we could be in the field and be confident in how we're what data we're collecting, and the data that we're collecting is going to be useful and valid for our model development, other planning needs. Let's see. So like I said, the initial phase of this is a scoping and design phase. The way that the contract or the RFP is going to will be set up, at least in terms of what we're imagining, is that we will hopefully then transition from the scoping into the implementation effort via a series of task orders. And so you can imagine that a separate task order might be to implement the survey for the Portland and Vancouver region, and with subsequent task orders being aligned with each sort of MPO. I will say that the geographic scope of the survey effort is statewide. So we will be surveying MPO regions, as well as the regions outside the MPOs for the rest of the states. So the ODOT regions will be participating as well. The idea would be, I guess, to be implementing the survey over the next few years. It'd be similar to the way I think OHAS was conducted the last time around. It'd be a multi-year effort depending on when funding would be available for each region. So a number of regions have already set aside implementation funding within their TIP process. And so that money is, in some cases, obligated. It's ready to go. And in other cases, a little bit more speculative. So, but the scoping and the timeline that I think we have laid out will allow for MPOs and regions to sort of, if they haven't already, start trying to figure out sort of their funding strategy for the survey. I think that's where I'm going to stop. Becky, oh, I should say, and I should thank our colleagues at the Lane Council of Governments, the Eugene MPO. The way the contract and the procurement side of the survey is going to work is that LCOG will be sort of the procurer and the contract administrator. The survey is going to be funded via federal funds, and so LCOG has gone through the FHWA and ODOT procurement certification process. So they're going to be in a position to procure this project with federal funding support, and so they will function in that role. The travel survey subcommittee, and this has always been the plan, will still serve as sort of the day-to-day sort of project management conduit for the project. And so the travel survey and sort of the core group and myself will be sort of interacting with a subsequent contractor in terms of implementation, and decision making then will rest, essentially with the subcommittee in terms of managing the project and all those good things. And so those are I think the key discussion points I wanted to update folks on today. And now I'll kind of, I think, ask Becky or Kelly or even Carol if there are any critical sort of items that I might have omitted, or if other folks on the broader committee have any questions. This is really good news. It's taken us a long time to get here, and we're like I said, we're 50 yards from the finish line at this point in terms of getting this project underway. So
I think you covered it, Chris. I don't have anything to add. The RFP that the travel survey subcommittee drafted as a team a year ago at this time is still intact, and that hasn't changed. It's more just getting all of our how the underlying process in place so that we can actually issue the RFP. That's been happening over the last couple of months.
Yeah, that's a good point. Folks who participated in that and provided comments to that will recognize sort of the substance of sort of the proposed scope of work. So that hasn't, there haven't been any fundamental changes to that. So.
And we still have it queued up to do phases. You might have mentioned this, Chris. Phases 1 and 2. Evaluating the methodology and proposing an implementation plan, and then phase 3 we can choose to enact under the same contract if we want to actually implement the survey.
That's correct.
The only thing I would add is that I've had several people ask me about, is it going to happen? What's the timing? We're not really concerned with our timing. We think we're right on track because we don't want to collect data now. It's not typical behavior. So I think everything is going to work out to our advantage. And so there are some funding unknowns on the ODOT side, but all of the signs are positive in terms of us getting what we need to do what we wish to do through the survey effort. So I feel optimistic on all levels.
Yeah, and I should throw out a kudos to ODOT as well. The way that we've talked about funding this right now is for ODOT to provide, at least half of the funding for the implementation. So that's a big deal, right? And so, but
we're paying for half of the MPO implementation, and then we cover the rest of the state. So it's a big number.
So we want to make sure we spend that big number, in the best possible way we can, and get the most useful data that we can.
So Chris, this is Ray. When would, under this current schedule, when would MPOs be on the hook for obligating their funds?
When, I think, as soon as, and this is all dependent on whether or not we can actually get in the field and collect, useful data, Ray. But, I'm thinking if it's sort of, if we get the all clear, right, if you will, we could, be in the field as soon as the spring of 2022.
Okay, but so for phase 1, my understanding is.
Well, okay, that's a great point, Ray. Phase 1 is covered, and so MPOs don't need to worry about funding phase 1. That's a great point. I neglected to sort of mention that. So we have that is being funded through OMPOC. For those of you who remember that OMPOC meeting, I don't know, probably at least a year ago now, they agreed to fund, I believe it was 125K of the scoping and design, and then ODOT is going to fund the additional, it's around 75K, I believe. So the consultants on the call might have to cover their ears. But I think that'll actually be in the RFP as well. But that's, so Ray, that's been taken care of essentially, the scoping.
Right.
So
yeah. I'm just, it sounds like we're not going to be, MPOs won't be spending any money this fiscal year.
Nope, I wouldn't. Yeah, it would take. No, I wouldn't plan on it. No.
Okay.
I think we could probably commit to that, Ray. We can probably commit to that.
Okay. I wanted with the new obligation rules. I just want to make sure so I can tell people to.
So when you say this fiscal year, you mean the fiscal year that we're currently in, that for us ends on June 30th of 2021. You mean
Correct.
that? Yep.
Correct.
I think we can commit to that. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. That's all I needed to hear.
Okay.
Actually, can I just jump in? This is Mike Jaffe. It's actually the federal fiscal year. This new obligation rate that we're working through with ODOT, where we have to track the obligations, is the federal calendar. So we need to know if we need any of the money in fiscal year 21, which goes to September.
Yeah, Mike. I even if it's September, I think we can commit to the MPOs not needing funding for this fiscal year then.
Okay.
Because even if we were in the field, we wouldn't be in the field during the summer, right? We would be in the field in the fall. And I still think that the fall of 2021, in that case, it would be after September, when school is back in, if it's back in, right? So.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Chris? All right, thanks for the update, Chris. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, next we have the GHG subcommittee, and I'm looking to see if Ali is online, or Tara, are you able to cover that for us today?
I'm able to cover if Ali's not there.
I don't see his name on the list. Do you see him anywhere there, Carol?
Nope, I'm afraid not.
Okay.
It's all yours, Tara. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, Ali can't, he's triple booked, as many of us are these days. Yeah, so Ali's been a great chair here. We do have a little bit of juggling in the leadership. So I remain from ODOT now with the climate office. I guess we started in February, so that's been a move for me. And then Taya was, with Metro there, was the other vice chair. And given all the changes at Metro, her time is pretty limited. And so we've swapped out, and happy to say that Peter Hurley, who's been an active member since the February, will take hold there of that spot and replace Taya. So our objective is twofold. One, to kind of identify and bring people up to speed on the basically needs. So it's and what we come out of this. So we're looking at greenhouse gas in general and what kind of data, tools, and methods and guidance are required. And so out of this, we're going to identify a list of, what are the roles of various agencies in doing that for data and analysis needs, supported by sort of the policy stuff that's moving on. And then to provide, and I want to couch this, that recommendations are really what I call like a prioritized action list. So we're not actually going to be doing a lot of these things. We are just going to say, here's all the things we found that are needed. Here's some tea leaves of some things that we know given our process to date, but really it's the role of the person that we put in charge of that with these tea leaves that's going to have to move that forward. So it's a prioritized action list. Yeah, and so over the last 6 months, we've done an initial survey of the stakeholders to understand their analysis needs and what they are doing and what they plan to do and what tools and data they have and what gaps they have in those areas. And we also are providing some education. So we had a foundational white paper about, okay, what is really required on greenhouse gas at the different levels, federal, state, and the various local things, and what are people doing and how do these things align with each other. So there's just a lot of definitions and terms and so forth, and just trying to lead from that policy context as to, you know, what is required, what are people doing and wanting to do even if they're not required, and what does that mean at the end of the day for the metrics, data, and analysis to support that policy conversation. So then looking ahead, this is our overall process. You know, I just talked about that top box. We're taking sort of an inventory and some background information. So we're in that third box where we're trying to synthesize all that into analysis needs and gaps. So that's our next deliverable, and the committee is starting to draft a framework for that and fill that out from what we've learned so far. Supporting that, we've got OMUG helping us with a greenhouse gas panel discussion. We're looking at that in January, so it's a little bit out of sync of where we'd like to be. And partly the reason why we've allowed that to happen is because there's a second effort that's going on outside of us, put on by the Good Company, a peer exchange of people to talk about climate action plans and some of the tools and data that they use. So this has a lot of overlap with what we're doing. And I think we can glean some needs and gaps from that discussion as well. So that will take place a couple half days in December, and we'll follow in January. So if anything new comes in through those, we'll try to incorporate those into our process as well. And then in January, we do intend to have sort of our next meeting and talk through this needs and gaps analysis and move forward in the spring and summer to sort of start filling out that action list with the roles and responsibilities tied to particular needs that we've identified, and then prioritize that. And so trying to get something out in probably the fall of 2021 on this topic. And I guess I would say that some of the things that are sort of floating to the top include just needing to have consistent emission rates across the board for a number of tools, whether that's, you know, the NEPA process that we traditionally do with air quality models and uses MOVES, up to sort of statewide strategy for greenhouse gas, which is used sort of the Vision and Val tool. Now we're starting to maybe get some more needs in terms of scenario planning or system plans. So a lot of people have their regional travel models. How do we report on greenhouse gas in those? Executive order we'll hear about later is asking us to do GHG assessments for projects within the STIP process, our statewide transportation improvement program, which is, you know, a couple $2 billion every few years to fund projects through the ODOT process. So that's a big challenge ahead of us that we're going to need emission rates for. So emission rates is a big one that we'll need. And I think DEQ is starting to take on that role, similar to what they do with the air quality emission rates. But since we don't have the federal leading in this area, it's kind of a different role. So we're still kind of discussing that, but thinking DEQ is penciled in for that spot. Also needing to align tools. We have a rulemaking coming up that you'll hear about from Cody later today for the transportation planning rule and some scenario planning. And so needing to align the tools that people can report on their greenhouse gas relative to state targets at this point for greenhouse gas reduction in various MPOs. So aligning the tools to do that. And then just overall consistency of assumptions. So we're making the same kind of assumptions in different areas because we know that like electric vehicles are cheaper to operate per mile, but they're, you know, they cost more. But some of those things starting to affect our operating costs. And, you know, if we would go to the cap and trade, that would also affect sort of fuel costs. So just needing to align some of these basic assumptions with what our future looks like are some of the things that are coming to the top.
Great, thank you for the update. Tara, any questions for Tara from anyone?
Yeah, this is Wes Risher. Tara, have you guys gone back and looked at the work that was done for the Columbia River crossing and the greenhouse gas estimates that were made for the various options from that project?
I would love to do more on that. I mean, it somewhat seems a little bit dated, right? I think that's probably back in 2015-ish or something, 16?
It's not that old, and it actually was some pretty large investment by ODOT to actually make estimates of the various options and the greenhouse gas benefits or not benefits from the different proposals. And honestly, I think that if any project that's had a lot of work done on it for greenhouse gas on a transportation project level, it's the only one I know that really had that kind of level. And I think it really would be unfortunate if we didn't look at that. And I'm not sure who in Region 1 has history on that, or who at ODOT has history on that. But I thought the engineering firm in our building here at the Lloyd building was part of that. And I thought Colin was involved in that project as a consultant back in the day.
Good. I will definitely make a note of that. I know through the STIP process, we are going to look at some elements, and we may even be using the team that has some of that expertise. So I'll definitely, but I agree. I think that is a gold standard, even though I feel like it's a little bit out of date, but I don't think it is in terms of the methods have not really moved forward. So great. And I think the other thing that I would highlight with that is we're not just talking about operational emissions. We are also talking about construction methods and materials. So
I think it was both.
Right.
Back in the day.
Right. So, great. Good point.
Awesome. Thanks.
Great to have you back, Wes.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions for Tara? Okay. Thank you, Tara, for stepping in for Ollie. I appreciate it. Okay, let's, Li Ming, I believe you're going to give an update on OMUG for us.
Yes, I will. So short OMUG is, of course, an information sharing forum for members for within the OMSC members and outside. And first is kind of the news for the coordinating committee. Since Tara moved on to the GHG subcommittee, Joe and Garth stays up. Thank for them to stepping up, so that Joe will start on January 1st, 2021, and Garth will pick up from 2022, I believe. And then the current member for the coordinating committee is Kyle, myself, and Joel, beginning in January. And next. So given all the COVID lockdown, there is quite a bit event that was kind of canceled. We originally planned for some activities, social networking events, along for the Innovation in Travel Modeling conference. That conference was canceled. So since our last meeting, this is the only event we had in May 7th on a freight panel. And I believe it's well attended. Becky did a report out for the freight subcommittee. And Sal and Eric talked about a application of the commodity flow for a Idaho case study. And then we have a Euro representative talk about their Euro data for highway infrastructure planning for freight. And Kyle talked about Metro's recent update on the freight model development activity. And finally, Miguel talk about some research findings on the last mile delivery innovation. So those including some very futuristic drones and robots and so on. So all those slides are available on our website. So if you're interested in checking out, they're all on there. So next. And on coming up, we have a GHG modeling panel that's now now in early 2020. We are still finalized the date. Carol is helping on that one. And Taro, I think, will be moderating on that. I think we have both local, state perspective, particularly Oregon and California agency, and then also a report on a federal, I think it's HCRP report by Cambridge Systematic. So certainly looking out from, if you're on our mailing list, looking out for that event announcement. Traditionally, we would do a post-TRB brown bag, given that this year is a virtual event. We will see probably in our discussion, we'll see how we are going to do this one. And then following that, we will, in the spring, we will have a economic related modeling topic. Those including value pricing, tolling, social equity, metros, economic value atlas, and any update from DLCD and OHCS on regional housing analysis. Those are currently on our agenda, but we will meet in November and December to outline event for the next biennial. As always, we will always welcome future suggestions for future topics. And I think that's it.
All right, thank you, Li-Ming. Any questions for Li-Ming?
Oh yeah, I think Jeffrey has comments. Yeah, it's early January 2021. Yes, you are correct. Sorry for the typo there.
Okay, thanks. I was just going to pop in and ask that then. Thanks, Li-Ming.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any other questions for Li-Ming? All right, thank you, Li-Ming, and thank you to yourself and Kyle, and thanks to Joel and Garth for stepping up and participating in that. I think that's going to be a nice addition, having some consultants working with us on that user group. It's great.
Sure, happy to help.
Great, thank you. So just a note, we're running a little ahead, so depending on, I think after I go through the work plan and we have a conversation on that, I'm not sure if Sean Edging and Megan Bolton will, I don't see them on yet. So if they're not on, Adam, I might call on you to give your update before we go through the regional housing needs analysis. So just kind of a heads up there.
Sure, Brian, whatever
Thank
works.
You. Great, thank you. Okay, so every 2 years, we update our work plan for the Oregon Modeling Steering Committee. And this is really something that we're lucky enough to have Carol lead for us, and heard a bunch of us cats that are kind of going in different directions and pull together a comprehensive work plan for us. So we've had the executive committee members and most of the subcommittee folks that you've heard talk today at least have some input to this work plan. This is a calendar year work plan, so it'll start in January and then go through the next 2 years so that everybody knows. So go ahead and the next slide. And in the work plan includes our mission and goals. It gives an organizational overview, the operating procedures, and then really the most of the changes we make are looking at those focus areas for calendar years 2021 to 2022. So what are the activities of the committee going to look like? Next. Of course, the mission, our mission is to ensure Oregon continues to have the right data, tools, skills, and expertise needed to answer important questions about our transportation systems, land use patterns, and economy. And we do that by promoting interagency coordination, collaboration and cooperation, facilitating the technical excellence and innovation, cultivating knowledge and skills of organs modeling professionals, and expanding awareness and understanding of organs modeling capabilities. And I'll cover those a little more in a few minutes. But first, talking a little bit about the organizational structure of the committee. I'm not going to go too much into the detail of this because we've already just heard from most of the subcommittees. So that gave you an understanding of what those subcommittee roles are. As you can see, every 2 years, we up, I guess, the OMSC leadership positions. Typically, we would rotate the chair position between Metro and ODOT, but a lot of changes going on for all of us. So due to some time constraints and due to Jeff Conjant needing to step off the committee and Chris already being leading that survey effort, we decided it would probably make sense for myself to serve as the chair again for the next 2 years. And then Chris will be the vice chair. Kelly Clark is going to step up as the MPO, or continue, I guess, as the MPO rep for the midsize. And then Tyler's going to serve the first year as the small MPO representative. And then we're going to have Steve is going to transition into that role in the second year. So we're getting some new faces there. And Oregon DQ, I believe, Carol, you're working with them to determine who it makes sense to have on the committee. So look for that information to be coming soon. Becky's going to continue as the MPC subcommittee chair. Alex will continue as the technical tools chair, and Chris is going to continue in that travel survey position. And then Ollie, who wasn't able to be here today, he'll be continuing in that GHG role because there's so many things going on there. We have vice chairs, that's going to be Tara and then Peter, as Tara mentioned earlier. So that's great. And then we just finished talking about the OMUG group and the folks that are serving there. So I appreciate all the people stepping up and continuing those roles. The first focus area is promoting interagency coordination, collaboration, and cooperation. The nice thing about having my presentation follow a lot of those subcommittee updates is you can see in their forward look a lot of overlap with these areas that we're looking at in the and as the focus areas in the work plan, sort of those work items, sort of these general member meetings. We have these twice a year. Becky mentioned the MPC meetings. A lot of coordination between the agencies go on in those meetings, sort of a working meeting quarterly. And Becky, you mentioned the collaborative topic list. So the other thing, really one of the things we try to do every year is, as the executive committee looks at those subcommittee charters, updates them as needed, and then we have them report out, obviously at these meetings, but sometimes we bring them in for a conversation during our executive committee conversations as well to make sure those subcommittees are functioning well, have good membership, etc. So goal 2 is facilitating technical excellence and innovation, and there's several pieces to this. One is this interagency model coordination. And again, through all the subcommittee conversations that we just had, you can see a lot of linkages. So we have that MPC tool inventory that Becky talked about that helps us understand what each agency is doing, where we might have overlap, what we're looking forward to doing, and how we can collaborate on things like this MCE tool. On activity-based modeling, we mentioned the TMIP-EMAT, the exploratory modeling framework, and then of course those peer review elements. And peer review, it obviously helps us create better tools and information, but we also can learn from participating in those peer reviews. Under the data piece, a lot of this has to do with trying to coordinate and collaborate on various data collection efforts. Obviously, the household travel, that's a huge effort, and we've been coordinating that. This will be the third time, I believe, that we basically coordinated that across agencies. So we've been doing that for a long time. The other one that we're trying to do this time is what Alex mentioned with those multi-agency traffic counts. As we, instead of having ODOT count something from our data folks, and then we come along and say, well, we wanted something a little different, so we spend money again to do it, and then the MPOs are going, well, we wanted something a little different. We're really taking time to coordinate that up front and sharing some costs on that, and I think we'll get better data at a lower cost as a result. So those are some of the things there. Next piece, the greenhouse gas, you heard Tara talking about that, supporting program level GHG analysis and preparing those modeling action plans and really talking about roles and responsibilities of the various agencies. We'll be looking forward to that. Becky mentioned that the MPC is really going to be taking a look at continuing those freight subcommittee recommendations and moving those forward. So we'll be hearing about those over the next year or two. And the big one we're all hearing a lot about is equity analysis. So over the next couple of years, we're going to have to figure out what that is and what that means and how we can help support those conversations as a modeling committee. So that, I think, is something that's going to be developing over the next 2-year period. So we'll make sure to be bringing some topics back, or may even engage some of those on the call, because I have a feeling this is going to be something that might be looked at slightly differently depending on the agency lens and the needs. So we'll need to understand how we need to collect data and support those conversations. Housing, we'll talk about that in a little while here. We have a presentation on the regional housing needs efforts. So that'll be something that we have to start thinking about how we incorporate that, especially into our future year analysis with our tools. There's a lot of work going on around performance measures, just mobility and reliability stuff alone. I probably have 10 efforts just in ODOT that I'm involved in at some level, and I'm sure every agency has that going on. So making sure we're having those conversations and coordinating those conversations, because the way we measure, the way we calculate those measures and define them matters. So anywhere we can get some collaboration on that, I think is going to be really helpful. And then there will be some model guidance development. You've heard some of these new tools, new efforts that we're trying to really get ingrained, I guess, into the way we do work. So we'll have to develop some guidance on that, both application guidance and user guidance as well. Then I think we're to goal 3. So this is cultivating knowledge and skills of various professionals in the modeling universe. We've heard about OMUG and the work they're doing. Like I said, I think it's really great that we're expanding that out and pulling consultants in, people who have a little different lens and a little bit different way of either developing or using those tools. So that's going to be great to hear back to the committee. And then other developments. We've heard about all these conferences, and some of those are just participating in the conferences. Some of them, people may have a chance to represent the committee and what we're doing, and then looking for those mentoring concepts. And finally, expanding awareness and understanding of the value of Oregon's model. So really developing these communication strategies and materials for people to do some outreach about the committee, what we do. That outreach is always going to be a two-way street, because it helps us understand what people need as well. So bringing that back to the committee as you do that outreach is really going to be helpful. I think we're going to continue to look for ways to improve some of our web presence. Maybe ODOT may be updating our web platforms over the next couple of years that might give us some additional opportunities. So hopefully that will happen. And then the next is, so we're the timeline on this, and like I said, kudos to Carol and everybody else who participated in this effort. I think it's just over a 20-page document, but a lot of it is information you'll be familiar with. So we're hoping people can take a look at this over the next month or so and get any comments, questions you have back to Carol, so that the executive committee can approve that in December before our January kickoff for the work plan. And with that, Carol, did I miss anything? Anything else you wanted to highlight, or anyone else that was involved in developing this before we I guess we could just open it to the group conversation or discussion or questions people might have.
Yeah.
At this point. So do we have anyone have any questions or comments or anything you wanted to highlight that maybe I missed?
There's more detail.
Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say
sorry, go ahead, Jeff. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to wait to see if
All right,
any
Carol.
of the people who weren't on the executive committee had any questions, but hearing none, I want to highlight the point of cooperation and coordination, and we use the phrase, I think, formal coordination in the document, and there's more detail, as Carol was just saying. I just want to highlight to everyone on the call that, I advocated for this amongst others on the executive committee because, I foresee a time of increasing budget difficulties, certainly at Metro, and I suspect for many of you as well. And I'm advocating sort of more formal mechanisms to actually get into the realm of pooling funds, sharing money, co-funding common products. I think the Activity Sim product itself and the consortium that is formed around it shows a way to a new business model that we either should adapt because it's a better business model for the field, or may have to adapt because individually we might be facing a future where we no longer have the resources to sort of go do it alone. And I don't mean to sound grim, particularly in the face of the multiple crises the world's facing right now, but I just want to urge people to think about the meaning of that and to start to think about how we could actually coordinate even more than we have done in the past. To me, the OHAS, the survey project, is kind of the shining example of how that could work, where there's a coordinated work program where we pool money to fund, or in this case, ODOT generously helps to fund significant portions of that. But there's a unified work plan and we're all part of it. And I'm advocating that we take the step to think about unified funding, pooling our funding. And so I just wanted to point that out. For people to mull over as we head into our next series of budget cycles.
Yeah, great comment, Jeff. And just a note that in reality, we wouldn't be able to get that big chunk of funding from ODOT unless we had this kind of support across multiple agencies to get that done and other people participating and supporting in that effort. That just wouldn't happen. So, because we have to sell that, up from us. So looking at that as a collaborative effort with a lot of people, putting skin in the game, so to speak, certainly helps us move those things forward. Carol, I'm sorry I cut you off there. You had a comment.
Nope. Yeah, Jeff covered it. I was just going to say this was a pretty high level overview, but there is a little more detail for people to chew on in the document.
Right.
So
yeah,
Brian, I'd like to just mention, this is Wes Risher. I'd like to mention, sort of chime in on what Jeff said. Oregon DEQ has participated in a consortium with Idaho, Washington for over 2 decades, using and pulling our grant monies from EPA to develop a regional model that's maintained by Washington State University out of Pullman, Washington, with climate inputs from University of Washington. This has been invaluable as a collaborative and as a joint investment between the 3 states and tribal entities. So it actually has been able to provide us better tools than we could get individually. And so I have a charter from that organization that I could certainly share with the organization here and how we set that up. And it's just a great model for this kind of thing where we're likely to see everybody's budget get hit and actually try to get better products for the work that we do collectively. And air quality definitely does benefit from the transportation program work that you guys do. And in fact, it's required in our state implementation plan. So we need to be a partner.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that'd be great if we could get that shared through Carol.
Can you send that, Wes?
Will do.
Any other comments or questions on the work plan? Okay, great. Yeah, and again, try to get any comments or questions that you have to Carol during November. If you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to any of us, any of the subcommittee chairs, myself, or Carol on that. All right, thank you. Okay, since we're running a bit ahead, and I don't think we have.
I do see Sean, but I don't know if Megan's on.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Megan, she just got word from her husband that she has to pick up her kid. She indicated that she'd be on probably around 2:15 or 2:30. But if she isn't here right now, I can also speak to the methodology, and when she comes back on the line, she can answer any questions for pieces that I might have missed.
Or Brian, you had mentioned maybe we could shuffle an item.
Yeah, maybe we can shuffle to give her a little more time to get on. And Adam, maybe we can have you jump in the queue here on talk about the Oregon Transportation Plan and OHP updates.
Sure, thanks, Brian. Carol, point of order here. Do I utilize share screen or are you running?
Either way, whatever you prefer. I have
Okay.
your PDF, or if you want to share your screen, that's fine too.
If you don't mind me trying the share screen, I will do that.
Okay.
And everyone, thank you for your time and the invitation. My name is Adam Argo. I am, as I mentioned earlier, I'm in the ODOT statewide transportation planning unit. I'm a principal planner there. So my main work, and the reason I was hired, I've now been there 3 years, is for leading the update to the Oregon Transportation Plan and Oregon Highway Plan. And just a moment and I'll get the slides up. Sorry. Okay. All right, so what I wanted to do is give an overview of the project. And for those of you tuning in, you may have been given this spiel by me before in some way, shape, or form over the last year. So I apologize for any redundant overview information. There should be enough new caveats and hopeful discussion where it'll be worth your time. And then getting at purpose and objectives of what is it and why are we doing this, our scope and approach for this particular project, and the aspect of where scenario planning is going to be this major tool and approach to how we're informing the priority goal areas and strategies in the plan updates. Related projects and background research that are both have already been completed or are about to happen that are in step with this work. And then trying to get at opportunities for OMSC involvement in next steps. Okay, so many of you are probably pretty well versed in this and understand. On ODOT's planning website, we like to promote our ORPlan search tool, and that also represents how we talk about the structure of statewide planning, where the Oregon Transportation Plan as kind of the overarching vision element policy plan for the state's transportation system. And then underneath that are those range of modal plans that does include the Oregon Highway Plan. And then some of those are subject to, meeting federal update requirements, such as the rail plan. Others are more of what we initiated as an agency that includes the transportation options plan, the bicycle pedestrian plan. And essentially they're both, highway plan is to me more of an integrated system element, less so of just calling it outright modal plan, and topic plan with freight, for instance, and safety action plan. I just tend to try to make sure we understand, we have to categorize them, but they really are supposed to be integrative elements that really are part and parcel of the Oregon Transportation Plan. And then from there, comes the transportation system plan efforts or planning that is done in localities. And of course, how we try to coordinate using our statewide planning approach and structure with the MPOs as they're meeting their federal requirements for updating their RTPs. So, and why are we updating these plans now? Well, let's you know, really get to it that we last updated the Oregon Highway Plan. And when I say update, I'm meaning it was formally adopted by our Oregon Transportation Commission in 1999. The Oregon Transportation Plan, OTP, was last updated in 2006. So there have, of course, been several amendments to those plans since then, including, you know, amending by reference the statewide transportation strategy, the STS, for meeting our legislative mandate targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In recent years, that was formally adopted as a component of the OTP. But to be sure, we understand that there are so many evolving aspects of transportation and what we're looking at now as a state, and, you know, thinking about our regions and your communities, multiple users with different needs, a lot of trends, or what, you know, in the scenario planning world we call drivers of change, and that includes, of course, emerging technologies, demographic workforce changes, the movement of freight and delivery of goods, climate change, that require deep investigation, exploration, and utilizing, of course, analysis tools, as you all are really engaged in that deep work, and really understanding that in the scenario planning, that's how we are working within a framework of exploring uncertainty and uncertain futures. And then there's certainly a pronounced need on sustained funding and priorities, probably hitting home even more so because what we're living through right now is a system shock that's also causing revenue funding shock, and then what we're looking at down the line. So the OTP is the overarching policy element, as I had mentioned, and I do consider it the vision element of the state transportation system in terms of policy plans. When I say looking out to 2050, we tend to think of that as our horizon landscape, as we'll be exploring scenarios and engaging stakeholders about what it is we're trying to do if we're establishing a vision for the transportation system. It doesn't mean I'm predicting what 2050 is going to look like. It means, can we get ourselves enough around imagination of where our trends and drivers of change are taking us, and looking at what the transportation system and what our communities are faced with, and have some aspect of what things look like in that horizon. Our objectives are, of course, assessing those trends and drivers of change, exploring alternative futures, and it's understanding the system, the users, their needs, and interrelationships. In the OTP level, I tend to think of interrelationships almost more of the abstract governmental relationship structure, governance. Of course, it matters how people interrelate with the physical infrastructure, but all of our plans, all the way from OTP down, really get at those kinds of things. So something I really see as a need in the OTP is to understand what it means for government coordination, what it means for institutional power, in thinking about that across from the state, region, local level. Objectives to inform a framework for prioritizing transportation investments. And then an approach to implementation. Plan implementation is certainly an element of all of our statewide plans now, probably really has been ensconced since the adoption of the Oregon Bicycle Pedestrian Plan in, I believe, 2016. So now we have an approach in looking to these updates where implementing actions are an absolute necessary component. The Oregon Highway Plan is a more tactical system element of the OTP, I like to think of. It articulates a multimodal nature of the system. It's the framework, again, for prioritizing investments. Probably here where we're honing in on strategies about effective management and operations of the state highway system. It informs tactical level planning and management objectives. And again, it has its own implementation component. So specific needs I'm looking for are develop a new, sorry about that. Developing a new vision and policy framework for the transportation system. Informing future plans and investments, decisions, and overall strategic decision making. As a little aside on that, if any of you are following the Oregon Transportation Commission, tomorrow they're going to hold their monthly meeting, and they are taking up approval of their own initiated and driven strategic action plan, which is basically a 2 to 3 year type of plan within their own work plan that has 3 overarching goals. And so here a trick is we can't inform that per se, because they really are trying to get the needle moving on that. What we have to do is think about where does the OTP and the OHP and other statewide plans connect with that type of effort. And okay, I just want to also mention on the OHP front, we are talking about policies, investment strategies for the highway system, and that for that system element, what are the needs and what is the revenue forecast? What kind of trajectories are we looking at for funding the system? And also performance measures that could be ensconced in the plan update. How will these be different from the past plans? So I usually, talk to a broad audience who isn't very well versed in scenario planning, is that yes, we're trying to embrace and address an uncertain future. You all are aware though, that scenario planning is not new to ODOT. It's not new to MPOs. It's not new to cities in Oregon. With the STS, it was very much driven on utilizing scenario planning and tools, working strongly with TPAL. And so I don't want to say we're reinventing the wheel with this as far as the process of scenario planning. I will say for the OTP, it's new that we are we're utilizing exploratory scenario planning for framing these overarching policy goal areas. I think of the STS as more of a normative scenario planning approach, but it's super important because a lot of what drives what drove the development of the STS are going to be baked into the assumptions that I see us doing as we're developing scenarios and exploring them. This graphic is really to illustrate that there's the technical processes, and that's something this OMSC very much is a important resource for driving methodology and vetting what it is how we go about doing it. But this graphic also illustrates that we have to do that in line with engagement of stakeholders, that there needs to be an alignment of planning process with assessment evaluation. Lucky for me, I have Brian Dunn and team who work within the STORM technical tool construct. And I'll just note that our scenario lead for the OTP and OHP process is going to be Ben Stabler, who used to work at TPAL, now with RSG. So good news is we're well acquainted with STORM, but we'll really look to all of you and certainly with TPAL as a helpful guiding element of how we're going to effectively utilize STORM in the process. So there have been some previously completed project work that helps inform these updates. My first real project that I took from cradle to grave at ODOT was the Emerging Technologies Impact Assessment, completed May of this year, which really was a kind of a stage 0 of the OTP and OHP updates, if you will, because it was a means of looking at a range of emerging technology trends in transportation and trying to understand the implications along or in how they meet our certain foundational policy goals. So we considered foundational goals to be those main elements that are in place in the OTP now, but also we look to some efforts that ODOT has been taking in our statewide planning so that we would really be looking at goals that we see being in where we go with the OTP update and with some other efforts. And the methodology where we really looked at STORM as sort of our, that would be our framework for assessment and understanding the drivers of change, in particular with emerging technologies. And I'll also note that late last year, I believe we concluded in February of this year, we did conduct stakeholder interviews, about 40 total, half within the agency and half with regional government partner representatives, people in academia, people in transportation industry. And those are really to gauge people's understanding of the OTP and OHP as they currently exist, what they mean to them in their work, and what they see as top of mind issues, and the way that they would frame what they would want to see going forward with the updates. There are a lot of other kinds of related projects going on, and we identified a series of white papers for my unit to lead, but with strong partnership across the planning and policy section that includes TPAL, where that includes a look at statewide mobility, and that is in particular getting at the mobility targets and the mobility policies and strategies that exist now in the OHP, and really trying to understand where things are going in terms of mobility to help inform what happens in the update. Demographic trends and economic regions. That one, I'm very fortunate that Becky Knudsen was a PMT member and really helped scope and lead what that white paper did to explore really understanding the state operates economically, geographically. There are things that are very particular to regions in activity, how they affect overall state goals in managing and operating the system, and what it means to economic vitality, as well as a range of demographic trends that are driving very important considerations around workforce, around residents of Oregon and the communities. Part of the Emerging Technology Impact Assessment was a white paper on mobility as a service. Mobility as a service is a very embryonic concept. It's already I'd say the last 2 years, probably seen enough startup and failure as a transportation marketplace kind of concept to where we're already, probably not quite up to the very latest, just by the report we completed in May. But we did want to build an understanding of mobility as a service as a business model, an operating model for potential use cases, pilots, and how ODOT as an agency can help stand up mobility as a service models for local areas and regions. Equity, Brian has touched upon equity before, and yes, we're doing a white paper on equity where we're trying to analyze best practices, or at least I would say promising practices around the country, and really trying to look at, well, how would a state DOT be trying to infuse equity in policy plans and in how we prioritize investments, and connect it to our own internal culture efforts. Housing and transit study, my colleague Lucia Ramirez is leading that effort, and I'm not very intimately involved in it, but I perhaps would look forward to a future time where either Lucia or myself could come back to OMSC and talk about where that project is, because that was a directive from legislature where we need to understand land use topologies that are optimal for investments and improvements in service, public transportation service, and bike ped performance measures, data implementation. That's an effort out of our active transportation group, and I serve on the PMT. So those internal efforts really, I'll just say, are geared at understanding how effective has the OTP and OHP been in terms of what we set out to do at the time, and where have we gone with them now, and what are our needs going forward with the OTP and OHP. So on our schedule and sequencing, what we've decided to do, because the OTP and OHP development project just refers to the contract itself. I'm in negotiations right now. We selected HDR as our lead consultant. There's several members of the team this summer, and we decided what we're going to do is phase, where OTP is going to be phase 1, an 18-month duration project. As we start to meet certain milestones and recognize inflection points that we've scoped and for this phase 1, we're going to start developing the phase 2, which will be the OHP component. We figured that's going to help us best to be efficient and to do this within a reasonable time process in terms of time. So at the end of the day, we're seeing that both plans are probably ultimately updated by late 2023 and early 2024. Our decision-making structure is probably looks very familiar to a lot of you who have been involved intimately in long-range planning processes. We're going to have a series of technical working groups. There's about 7 of those. One of them is a modeling work group. I put that in asterisk because I believe with OMSC, we need to have some coordination of how you'll be involved in helping inform that work group, but it's got to be a two-way, right? And also, I will note that in the contract, we are formally scoping that we do briefings with MPOs, we do briefings with advisory committees, and that includes OMSC. But I'm really hopeful we could have, you know, an interactive dialogue here about what does effective coordination look like going forward for these updates. A planning coordination team is primarily internal to ODOT, and that's going to be across the agency, so that we're really recognizing and understanding the needs and gaining input from our various divisions, sections, units, offices. And the policy coordinating committee is where we bring in our external stakeholder partners. That's going to be broad representation, and that's going to include MPOs. That's going to include our ACTs, our local communities. And so that is essentially the steering entity for where we gavel down on what we recommend as policy goal areas. But of course, that spins up to the Oregon Transportation Commission, who will be the ultimate approver of where we go. And I will note that I am hopeful we would get a commissioner involved in this work, probably at the policy coordinating committee level, to commit to that all the way. So next steps, and this is where, you know, I'm hopeful we can have a little discussion about opportunities for OMSC involvement. There's the project decision-making structure, and that's where I got at the modeling work group. But there's also, you know, with considering MPO involvement in the policy coordination committee, and also what you would want to see out of briefings. Myself and likely our consultant project management team would be in front of you at least 2 or 3 times throughout the process. But informally, and that kind of gets back to what Jeff Laconia mentioned earlier, I believe that in uncertain budget landscapes and all of the constraints we're going to be working within, I want to make myself available to you if there are other times for briefings or opportunities for involvement. So I'd like us to consider that. And how you see an effective connections and coordination with the work of what OMSC is doing, what we're hoping to achieve at the OTP and OHP. By the way, we may end up changing the name of the Oregon Highway Plan itself. So I'm always interested in people's creative ideas of how we might title something that is going to function more as an integrative system element of our statewide plans. And any other ideas of how you'd like to be briefed throughout the project, I'd appreciate hearing. So Brian, I hope I didn't, and Carol, I hope I didn't run us askew of time too much.
No, I think we're doing fine.
Okay.
Great presentation, a lot of information there. Of course, I have your ear outside of this, so hoping maybe we can.
Lucky for me.
Yeah, me too, right? So I'm hoping to
Right.
get, some of the other folks' input and thoughts. So I see a few. Jeff, I see you took yourself off of mute. Do you have some thoughts or comments for Adam?
Well, it was just a question. It's more of an organizational question, so I don't want to take too much time. But Adam, thanks for the presentation. Just out of curiosity, how are the different ODOT regions plugged into this planning process? Are they on one of the committees? Like, are their planning directors on one of the committees you cited? Or I'm just curious how you as ODOT bring the regions into this versus the HQ folks like yourself. And don't take too much time. I'm sure other people have more substantive questions.
No, that's a good question, Jeff. So one thing I will note is up front, we really did need to have region perspective. So in the build up to the RFP and development of what our objectives are for these updates, I engaged our region planning managers. They convene regularly once a month with our section and division leads. And that was helpful because they were also interviewed in our stakeholder engagement process. It was to get their kind of top of mind issues and what those plans are for them. How do they affect them? How do they impact what they do in their day to day? But I also involved region representation in our evaluation of proposals. We got 2 proposals from 2 large competing teams, and as well as we did an interview process. So I needed that regional involvement there. And now we see region involvement is necessary for the planning coordination team. That's that internal group. I also know that we have to be very cognizant about how we engage the ACTs, the areas of transportation throughout the state, and as well as NPOs. So there's going to be those formal roles, but I'm actually also, just going to start reaching out to regional planning counterparts and some ways to give them some input to me of what's going to be effective for you. And part of that, I suppose, would be, say, we could issue out surveys using SurveyMonkey here and there. Surveys that are more pointed, right? They're really going to be more in the weeds if we're starting to get in strategic or tactical level stuff, as well as the modeling work group. I don't know exactly what it looks like for ODOT region representation, but I am thinking about the modeling work group where MPO region level folks are going to be involved. So it's there most formally in our internal policy or planning coordination team, but I'm still pretty open-minded about what are other methods and means we're going to get region involvement.
All right, thanks. Any other questions for Adam, or any thoughts or inputs that you have for Adam?
Brian, I had a quick question for Adam.
All right, go ahead, Mike.
Thank you for the presentation, Adam. I quickly heard something you said something about a process called STORM, or that Ben Stabler was leading, and I didn't quite catch it. If you explained it.
Oh, okay. Good news. I get to pass the hat of talking about STORM to a ton of expertise that's sitting on this call. And I'm going to let Brian do that. It's not that Ben is the lead of STORM so much as we utilize STORM as understanding the matching of the appropriate tool analysis tools to what it is we're exploring and getting at with development of priority goal areas in our needs. And Brian, if you want to give your elevator speech of STORM, I'd love it.
Yeah, I'll just give a quick one. So that's an acronym, Mike, for S is the strategic level work. So that's the work that Adam's talking about, really, especially with the OTP. And there's certain types of tools we would use for that. Potentially the vision eval tool. We could use our statewide model and some other tools. And then we have the tactical, the T, which is really at the high level, all the regional transportation planning work, system level, where you're starting to make some, usually a system plan is general mode, function, location kind of choices. And then we would move into operations, which would be more where we were moving to a more detailed tactical and operations level with something like a project. So NEPA, and you can see that Carol's brought that up here.
Thank you.
and
Excellent.
and then we have sort of the reporting and monitoring, and that goes on at every level. So, at each one of these levels, hopefully we have performance targets, performance measures, things we're trying to do. So we set those up to see how are we doing, that's the concept. And we came up with that concept because, the problem we have is people start talking about tools, and I wouldn't use a micro simulation tool for a strategic level assessment. You're testing much different things, much different assumptions than I would be doing when I move down into an operational level. So we were looking at something that would make sense to sort of those of us in the technical world, and then folks like Adam who work more in the planning and the facilitation and organizing all these things, so we could start talking a similar language about, okay, what are we doing and how do we align the right types of tools and inputs for that particular process.
Okay, thanks. Tara,
thank you, Brian.
Sent me a message saying, Mike, you should know that because we talked about it in the GHG papers.
So anybody else have some questions or thoughts for Adam? We've got a few more minutes. I guess one of the things, go ahead, Tara.
I didn't hear you talk about, I appreciate the talk. I didn't hear you say anything about how we might make this plan more dynamic rather than a one-time thing to sit on the shelf, given all the uncertainties, how we might think about, say, thresholds of when we need to revisit elements of this plan. Has there been thinking on that? And I don't know, this might be a group that you could reach out and see if other people have good examples of that, if not.
Yes, there's been thinking on that, Tara. One aspect is simply that a dashboard kind of concept, where, and I know that this is the commission, the current OTC is seriously interested in having these kind of dynamic dashboard type updates for their own strategic action plan measures that they're putting within that plan, but also for the OTP itself. OHP, I know that's part of it, but there needs to be more talk about what makes this dynamic, because to me, analysis tools, assessment tools, GIS-based story mapping, those are kind of tools we could utilize and do pretty effective types of dynamic aspects of updating and informing what we're doing, not just having a large volume of hardback material like what all the state plans that are sitting on my shelf I'm looking at right now. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is getting a little meta and talking about what do we want the OTP to look like and be. And the direction that a lot of my leadership chain and peers get at and talk about here is that the OTP should be pretty executive in its summary, in its form, and that it should be something that's really easy to shop around with graphics and with key messaging, and instead of being, you know, something where you could have technical appendices to all of that, but instead of something that is just, again, a large, thick book that, you know, reads like a manual. And I understand that. I don't think we have that answer yet, but I think it's important because a big measure of success for me is that any stakeholder, any interested Oregonian would understand they could call up the OTP and what it is, you know, what it does, and what are the main aspects about it. But that, you know, we don't have a perfect answer for that yet. I think of that as part of what's dynamic, but that it's not the whole of it. I just think that would be part of what makes it dynamic, is what makes it very understandable, and then gives it power, right? Gives the OTP an aspect of guiding and guiding us in terms of having a resilient plan, having a robust plan, for instance. What does it look like to have equity as a lens? That's another huge question that we need to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I'll note, Tara, we do have a climate working group as well, and that I'm soon to meet with Amanda Peets. We're going to talk about how we're going to coordinate and align on efforts to make sure the OTP is steering in that in the right parallel direction.
Great.
All right. Great. All right. Thank you, Adam. Looks like timing wise, I'm going to move us along. I think there's a couple of follow-up items Carol will have with Adam. It sounds like probably want him to come to these meetings twice a year to give us an update of how things are going and to talk about some of the findings on various papers they're doing. And there might be some conversations with the executive committee and Adam to try to figure out from sort of that peer review interaction and role that we can support this effort with the OMSC. So I could see those as a couple of follow-ups for the OMSC with Adam.
Thanks, Brian. That sounds, that's right on line with what I'm hoping we can do together.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Thanks again, Adam. I appreciate it. I know you've got a long, an interesting road ahead of you, a big challenge. So
can't do it alone. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Okay. So now let's move to, we have Megan Bolton and Sean Edging here to talk to us about the regional housing needs analysis efforts.
And Sean, do you want to share your screen or do you want me to display your slides for you?
I'm happy to do it either way. I have the slides with me, but I'm also happy to do it if you prefer. Whatever
you go right ahead then. That works.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And welcome and thank you guys for both being here. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you for having us. It's always, I mean, it's great to be able to kind of transfer or information share with transportation planners. I know I'm so often confined into kind of my niche and corner of the planning world, but even just listening to this conversation has been great. Yeah, I guess I'll just briefly introduce myself and then allow Megan to introduce herself. Hi, my name is Sean Edging. I'm a housing policy analyst here at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. I'm working on the implementation of House Bills 2001 and 2003. House Bill 2001 is, as many of you know, the bill that re-legalizes many missing middle housing types, and then House Bill 2003 includes new planning requirements to better meet the intent of Goal 10 in our statewide system. And yeah, I'll pass it off to Megan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Bolton. I'm Assistant Director of Research at Oregon Housing and Community Services. And OHCS was tasked with leading the work around the regional housing needs assessment piece of HB 2003, which is what we'll primarily be talking about today. Thanks for having us.
Excellent. And yeah, I'm just going to share my screen really fast. So, you know, the intent of what we're hoping to talk about here today. So one of the requirements that was passed in this House Bill 2003, which I'll talk about in a minute, includes a regional housing needs analysis, this kind of pilot analysis conducted by OHCS and evaluated by both OHCS and our department. And what I hope to talk about today is just kind of briefly talk about, you know, the legislative context, what some of the key components of the methodology are, as well as some of the kind of initial results and findings. And then kind of pivot into thinking through how such an analysis could implement into our existing kind of Goal 10 housing planning framework. And something I want to note before we dive into this, you know, I've been talking a lot about the arena, but mostly with people who are very involved in the kind of housing planning world. And so I really want to invite people, if there are things that I kind of gloss over or don't explain fully, please feel free to raise your hand or ask questions, and I'd be happy to clarify anything that I might just kind of miss, just being in my lane of thinking about housing all the time. So just want to invite that. So just to start, let's start with kind of thinking through the legislative context. So the regional housing needs analysis, it comes from House Bill 2003, and the entire legislative purpose behind this bill is really about meeting Goal 10 and really about encouraging the availability of adequate housing units to meet the need of all Oregonians, essentially. It includes a lot of different provisions in it that are intended to better meet that ultimate goal. And I guess I had a slide before this that really talked about each of those specific requirements, and I'm realizing that was necessary, but I don't have it here. But there are actually a few components to House Bill 2003. One of them is the RENA, which I'll talk about in a second, but there are also two other components, two primary components. One is a new schedule that for housing needs analyses. That's kind of the typical Goal 10 planning document for cities both inside and outside of the metro, as well as a whole new planning document requirement called a housing production strategy, which is intended to be kind of an extension of the housing needs analysis, which I'll talk about in greater detail later. But for the regional housing needs analysis, what this bill tasks both of our agencies with doing, it tasks OHCS with developing a methodology by September 1st of this year that estimates housing at a statewide level for each and provides estimates at kind of a regional level. So you could think of like the metro region as one or another one like that. Additionally, it tasks them with submitting kind of a summary report to the legislature by March 1st of next year. What it tasks our agency with doing, DLCD, is evaluating this regional housing needs analysis in comparison to kind of existing Goal 10 requirements in the framework, and really thinking through, you know, can a regional housing needs analysis help us realize the kind of goal and intent or the underlying aspirations of Goal 10. And we similarly need to submit our evaluative report to the legislature by March 1st of this year. Right now, we're kind of in the midst of our outreach that we are doing to a variety of stakeholders that are interested in kind of the housing planning process. And what we are hoping to do is develop a kind of first draft for consideration by our commission in January in order to have a final report ready by March 1st. To talk a little bit about our report, there are a variety of things that we have to address in there in terms of how we evaluate ARENA, but fundamentally what we're trying to answer are three questions. One is how a regional housing needs analysis compares with our existing framework of housing planning. In what ways is it really different? In what ways is it similar? And then the next two elements are providing recommendations. One set of recommendations would be, you know, if the legislature decides that the RENA is something that is worthwhile moving forward with, what can we recommend as an agency to best implement and provide to best implement the legislative intent of providing affordable, fair, and equitable housing outcomes. And then if the RHNA doesn't move forward at the legislature, what alternative recommendations or recommendations that we should implement anyways should we put forward to similarly meet that same legislative intent in lieu of RHNA? So that's kind of the content or focus of our report. And so I'm going to transition here to give the microphone to Megan to talk more about the kind of details of the methodology. OHCS has completed a methodology, in line with their deadline on September 1st. They have published a technical report to their website. It's a very lengthy document, and it has a lot of details about how they've conducted this analysis. And I'll let Megan speak to that in greater detail.
Great, thanks, Sean. So if anyone wants to go look at our 480-page report, it is on our website. I will say a lot of that is just tables because we had to do some allocations of need to every single city, but it's a pretty fun read if you're interested. But so as Sean talked about, OHCS was tasked with developing a methodology for regional housing needs and assessment. And we contracted with Echo Northwest to complete this methodology. And so, what we were directed to really do is to estimate the existing housing stock in each city and region, to analyze the housing shortage in each city and region, and to develop a RHNA to identify total housing units needed to accommodate population growth over 20 years, and then allocate that housing need to each city within each region. And so one of the first steps in that was choosing our regional boundaries. And you'll see what is here is sort of the final, or not the final, but the recommendation in the report that we released. And this really required consideration of lots of different factors. We did a review of data availability for different geographies, comparisons of housing markets, commuting flows, and we determined these regions because we knew we had to, that it turns out the most appropriate data source for this full analysis is 1 year public use microdata sample data from the census. So we were a little bit restricted in the regions because of that, because we had to use the public use microdata areas. So this may not be ideal. I think in particular, Central Oregon, we sort of would have liked that region to look a little bit different, but this is where we landed, and with stakeholder input, this seemed to sit well with most folks. Go ahead and move to the next slide, Sean, I guess, yeah. So now we are at the components. So these are what's here are the key components, the three key components of need. So we've got projected need, we've got underproduction, and we've got housing for the homeless. So the projected need, as you'll see when we look at what the results were, that we find that we need about 584,000 total units statewide, and about 76% of that comes from projected need over 20 years. About 19% comes from the underproduction, and then about 5%. Or 29,000 units are units needed to house those who are currently experiencing homelessness. And I'll get into each of these in a little bit more detail. Go ahead and go forward, Sean. Okay, so, oops. Sorry. I'm looking at my own version with some notes. Okay, so, and then so those are the three key components of need. And then after we calculate the total regional need from those three components, the methodology distributes each component to income categories, and each component sort of has a slightly different way of looking at income distribution, which I'll get into. And then it determines the location of units relative to urban growth boundaries of cities within each region. And then finally, each component is allocated to local jurisdictions, which is done using a combination of current population, current jobs, and population growth. Go ahead and move to the next one, and we'll kind of dig in to each one in a little bit more detail. So the first component of need, again, is that projected need over 20 years. And so that is really done by looking at PSU's population forecasts through 2040, and then calculating household growth, looking at current household size. And then this 1.14 household unit, we use this a lot in the methodology. This is kind of the national number of units per household. And then that gives us, so we multiply the 20-year household growth by that, and we get our 20-year projected need. And then in this case, to then distribute by income, we use the current regional distribution of household income based on 2018 ACS data for each region. And then after that, we sort of do that distribution, and then to determine how much of the projected growth will occur inside and outside of UGBs, we again use Population Research Center data on estimated population growth at the city and unincorporated county levels and aggregate to the selected region. And the units located inside and outside of UGBs have the same income distribution, which matches the region. We can move on to the next one. For underproduction, so on underproduction, we use that same target of units per household of 1.14 for most regions, although we did notice that in regions with a higher prevalence of second and vacation homes, that didn't seem particularly accurate. So we actually removed second and vacation homes in those regions and came up with a target of 1.1 units per household target. And in places where the existing ratio is under that ideal kind of ratio, then we calculate what that underproduction is. And then for the unit income distribution here, what we do is actually look at the current distribution of cost burdening, because we know that a result of underproduction of housing is, a rise in housing costs and increased cost burden. So for this one, that's how we do the unit income distribution. And then for the underproduced units, we only allocate those inside UGBs, not outside of UGBs. And then we can move to housing for the homeless. Yep. So for housing for the homeless, we are primarily using the PIT data for the sheltered and unsheltered populations. PIT is the point in time count that is done every year by continuums of care across the state. But we do recognize, literature shows us that the point in time does underestimate the homeless population. There are estimates that it undercounts by anywhere from 130 to, that the accounts are likely 130 to 160% higher than what the PIT estimates. So we applied a multiplier of 160% to the PIT count to estimate the sheltered and unsheltered population experiencing homelessness. And then we also looked at the McKinney-Vento homeless data, which is from the Department of Education, and estimates or records really number of school-age children who are experiencing homelessness. And because we recognize that there are a number of households who are living doubled up with friends and family in hotels and motels who aren't captured in the point in time. So we added those folks into our estimate as well. And for the income distribution with this data, we actually used some internal data OHCS has on the income levels of folks served through our homeless services program to get to an estimate of what that distribution should look like. And as with underproduction, these units are allocated within UGBs only, and then allocated to UGBs based on a regional share of current population and current jobs, which is also similar to how the underproduction is allocated at the city level. So the results. So you'll see This map shows basically kind of the current stock and the projected need and what would be added by 2040 using this RHNA. And in most cases, you can see in most regions, the housing stock added over the 20 years will account for about a less than or around 25% increase over the existing housing stock in each region. There's, I think, Deschutes County has the kind of largest amounts. 40% of future stock will be added by 2040 based on the RHNA analysis. And I think the next slide is useful. It's kind of the table that really breaks this down by region and shows the how each factor contributes to the need in each region. So you can really see what's a driver of the new units in each region. And you can see that, for instance, in the Northeast and Southeast, there's, according to the way we looked at it and calculated, there's no real underproduction. Enough units have been built to accommodate households. And so where in those regions, housing for the homeless, particularly in the Southeast, actually makes up a pretty big percentage of the need of total units over the next 40 years. But for the most part, you can see that the projected need is certainly really driving it. And in some places, the others play a larger or smaller role. And the next slide, I think, is where we start to get into income categories. So here's where we can also see, and this is statewide, but we can see for each income group, again, sort of what's driving the need at each income level. And certainly, because of the way we're doing the distributions for underproduction and housing for the homeless, you can see that that's really where the bulk of the need is coming from for the 0 to 30% of median family income population. For projected need, you can see that at the plus 120, that's most of that is due to the projected need over 40 years. And I think the next table might shows the same thing in the chart. And really, for us at OHCS, this is a pretty important slide to be focusing some attention on. We know that for housing for the population under 50% of MFI, there's going to be a requirement for some public support to really make those units work, to be financially viable developments, and even at the 50 to 80% level, they're likely to require some public support. So this is something certainly as an agency, we need to be thinking about. Is there a way we incorporate some of this information into our prioritization of some of our funding sources? These are conversations we're going to be having as we go through this process, but certainly if the RHNA is adopted. And we know that that's a question we'll get a lot from jurisdictions is, how will we meet these requirements? If there's a lack of funding for particularly the most affordable housing. But certainly the data and the analysis shows that the need is great. And one of the things that this regional housing needs analysis really does is takes into account that housing markets are regional, and that that each city needs to be playing a role, particularly in the production of affordable housing to meet the needs of folks across the state. I think that's the last slide in the methodology.
Yeah. And so I can kind of pick it up and start talking about a little bit of the Goal 10 and implementation framework. But I think maybe we should take a moment to pause and just kind of ask. That was a lot of information on the methodology, as well as some of these kind of initial results we've been finding. And I'm wondering if there are any kind of clarifying questions on just, what details of the methodology.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat box.
Oh, okay.
Just saw some of those, yeah. And one of the questions is about the 1.14 housing unit multiplier, and it accounts, I think I maybe clarified this, but in the regions where we noticed, where we know there's a prevalence of second homes and vacant homes, we removed those. But but generally speaking, the 1.14 doesn't. That's the kind of national average without removing second homes. And I think, yes, thank you, Carol, for linking to the full technical report. We do have an executive summary that has a couple of these visuals. Sean, I don't know if you sent that out or not, but we could definitely send that out.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to follow up with that.
I might let you take over for a second because my daughter is knocking on my door.
Yeah, but that's a good point. I think, whenever we link to just say the bare report by itself, it's not quite an afternoon read. So I think we can definitely send that out for folks to take a read of just that kind of methodology. I'm noticing, let's see, we have a question from Jeff on how exactly do you allocate underproduction need to household income categories? And that's a very good question. That is actually allocated based on a city's proportionate share of regional cost burdening. So based on information that we have in the ACS, we can tell which income category, say in that 0 to 30 category, we can tell how many of those households are cost burdened, same with 50 to 80, 80 to 100, all those different income brackets. So we can know how many people in each one of those income brackets is cost burdened. And what we do is we calculate the underproduction that's happening at the regional level and then allocate that to individual cities based on their proportionate amount of cost burdening in their city. Because the whole point of the underproduction is that as a result of the fact that, we have not been producing enough housing units, housing prices have gone up, thus resulting in a greater share of cost burdened households. So that's how the allocation is done. And then, yes, we can also share a copy of our slides as well.
So follow-up question, we don't have to get too far into the weeds because Metro probably will read the full report, but so if that implies that the policy objective, of course, is to have everyone housed in something that is affordable by the standard definition of affordability. And then that implies then that the people, suppose we produce the new housing, people will move out of the more expensive into the affordable unit. Are you then accounting for the freed up unit that they vacated?
I'll let Megan speak to that.
Or am I overthinking? It just seems to me there's kind of a two-step implication there, and maybe I misunderstand what you're doing.
No, so and I want to clarify really quickly too, the underproduction is that is distributed by income at the regional level, and we're looking at regional cost burdening. The local allocation actually is based on current population and current jobs. So we don't allocate based on cost burdening all the way down to the city level. The local allocations are based on those current population and current jobs. So it's just what the allocation by income for the underproduction really does is just gives a guideline for within the region to each city how much of the underproduced units should go to each income bracket. I don't know if that helps at all, but yeah. But one of the things we went back and forth on was if we should use a different type of shortage analysis to do more what you're talking about and look at where are people living now and where's the shortage for different income groups and what is the greater need. And we went away from that and went to this 1.14 ratio because we're really talking about for new unit needs, what should they look like? And we do understand that there will be some changes over time. And that is one of the things we're recommending and actually doing right now is looking at shorter time periods, because we want to see after 5 years, what does this look like? If we're actually making a change and people are making different decisions, we need to reevaluate and then look at this again. So it's a good question. And I think something we're still thinking about, like how to account for that as we move forward.
I guess the second part of my question was really about a concern, and again, this is my first exposure to this. I haven't followed the details. That you're actually double counting need, because the underproduction by definition is talking, if I understand it, is talking about people who are already housed who are paying too much. You're saying there's a need to supply more affordable units, which implies that they'll move out and vacate an existing unit. And I don't know how you're accounting for the existing units, or maybe I just misunderstand the flow of logic.
So we're not, I wouldn't say we're double counting because that we're looking at what hasn't been produced to meet existing need just overall, not for households who might be living in units that are unaffordable to them. Just what we need to get to a place where we're at a 1.14 ratio to accommodate new household growth, demolition, vacancies, et cetera. So the idea is to think about what we need to meet existing demand and distribute that by income based on cost burdening. But we can follow up on some of this and get into more details. If you're interested, we're actually going to have a much more technical methodology conversation with Echo that might be of interest to you if you want.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
Jeff,
Let's put this offline, so otherwise we'll wait till everyone else is
Jeff, this is Chris. We are in the process of setting up one of these stakeholder meetings with this group, so we can, Dennis and I and Mary Beth and Ted and all are going to talk methodology. So
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. Okay, yeah, well then, not to dive too deep in the methodology, but I think I'll kind of shift gears now and really start thinking about our implementation framework and how we currently plan for housing today. And start thinking about some of the issues that we as a department are thinking about in terms of how, say, a regional housing needs analysis, what advantages, opportunities, and challenges and considerations should we have in terms of thinking about fitting it into our current Goal 10 framework. And I think the best way to do that is just start by explaining historically how have we planned for housing in terms of our comprehensive planning process, as well as our housing needs analysis, which has been kind of the cornerstone document for planning for that. What is changing as a result of House Bill 2003, and what are our kind of new established requirements? And then what does ARENA do that's different than those two things, both the historical way we've planned for housing and the new way that we're going to plan for housing? I'm going to start with housing needs analyses. Mostly the people that I've talked to have been pretty familiar with what a housing needs analysis is at its kind of core. So I don't actually have a slide prepared on that, but I can speak to it briefly. Functionally, the way local jurisdictions plan for housing today is through a document referred to as a housing needs analysis or a housing capacity analysis. And functionally, what they do is they receive a population forecast from Portland State University Population Research Center or within the metro by the metro. And they take that need, and then they themselves, as a city, determine a methodology to determine how many housing units they are going to need over a 20-year horizon based on this population growth. And so already right off the bat, we can see that there's a pretty substantial difference with how this regional housing needs analysis does a methodology and how an H&A historically has done it. Because when you do that analysis, when you do that based on that population projection, you are assuming that you currently as a jurisdiction meet the totality of your housing needs. You don't have underproduction, you don't even have a consideration of housing for people who are experiencing homelessness. And this is actually a pretty strong deficiency that we're trying to correct as part of our housing production strategy, but it's something that very much exists, and the ARENA actually takes these components into account to recognize the fact that we have historically underbuilt housing at a statewide level. Similarly, we have this new requirement that's called the housing production strategy. I think I'll talk briefly about that. Let me see if I have a slide on that. I don't. All right. The housing production strategy is a document that is required. So now cities, they have to do an H&A on a 6 to 8 year schedule, 6 if you're within the metro, 8 if you're outside of the metro. And then following that, a year after that deadline, they have to complete this new document called a housing production strategy. And what that document does is it builds off of this H&A. So your H&A identifies this 20-year need, and you develop these kind of policies. How are you going to zone land to accommodate the housing units that you need? Are you going to expand your UGB? What measures are you going to do to actually accommodate those units that you've identified as needing to be built over the next 20 years? The housing production strategy really takes a farther lens. How do you actually ensure that those housing units, you might have zoned for them, but how do you ensure that they actually get built? And so the whole point of a housing production strategy is for a local jurisdiction to sit back and consider, how are we as a local jurisdiction going to ensure that in order to meet this need that we have identified, are actually promoting the development of housing and putting forward strategies that make it more likely for the housing types that we need to get built actually get built. So that's just kind of a brief overview of those two. I think one thing that is really helpful for me to think about in terms of both of these documents is that there's really a mixture of a descriptive element as well as a more policy or prescriptive element that goes into each one of these documents. For an H&A, that descriptive or data-driven element is really the population projection. And then from there, you start making policy determinations about where you're going to build the housing, what types of housing you're going to build, where are you going to upzone, where are you going to expand your UGB, how are you going to serve those areas. Those are a lot of policy considerations. The housing production strategy builds on that. It builds on this 20-year forecast by recognizing that we need to identify a lot more types of needs, say housing for people who are experiencing homelessness, housing for people who experience disabilities, housing disaggregated by race and ethnicity, and recognizing disparities that exist there. And so that part's very data-driven, but then it starts moving into policy considerations. How are you going to reach out to, consumers and producers of needed housing to figure out what strategies would work best for them in terms of meeting their needs? And then what strategies are you actually going to take on and implement as a city to meet the needs that you've identified? And so it starts from a very data-driven place and then moves to a more policy-driven place. And really, when we've been talking about this regional housing needs analysis, we're really talking about a data-driven process. What it gives us is information on, say, the number of units that are needed over a 20-year horizon. And so really one of the best ways to think about a regional housing needs analysis is intersecting with this kind of descriptive element that happens in an existing H&A and HPS. So you can think of a regional housing needs analysis as providing this kind of baseline of a housing projection and information about, housing for people experiencing homelessness, all of these other different categories. And then from there, the local jurisdiction takes that and says, all right, where are we going to build this housing? What type of housing are we going to build? Where are all these policy conversations that we're going to have to accommodate the housing that we need to over the next 20-year period? It's different in the sense that it provides us this kind of data-driven analysis that gives us a consistent methodology that is applied statewide, whereas today, the way it happens is essentially spot determining housing need, and you can't really compare any two cities because their methodologies are very different from one another. So that is just one of the big framework considerations of thinking through how we could consider incorporating something like ARENA into the Goal 10 framework. Now, there are some kind of clear differences between the kind of methodologies between the ARENA and the H&A and HPS. This is a very complicated graph, but what it lists is all of the different categories that are outlined in statute and in rule that jurisdictions need to meet as part of their housing needs analysis up here. There are specific considerations for the metro, as well as for housing production strategies, and really where ARENA overlaps. A lot of these elements are still do need to be done by the local jurisdiction, but what the ARENA provides is a kind of consistent baseline of understanding need at the regional level. And so I'll just talk briefly about kind of some of the opportunities and challenges. One of the biggest opportunities that we've seen, or one of the issues that we've grappled with, is in a housing production strategy, we have these new requirements to identify these new housing needs, but we have to ascribe methodologies and rule. And one challenge that comes with that is if we want to change this in the future, we actually have to undergo a new rulemaking process to make any changes to it. One advantage of this approach is that it's something that can actually be changed with iteration and discussion and future feedback. It also provides us a more comprehensive picture of housing need than we've ever really conducted at the statewide level. It considers a lot of factors that aren't traditionally considered in housing needs analyses and even would be a struggle to capture in housing production strategies. With that said, there are still a lot of challenges and considerations that we're thinking through. One of the biggest ones that we ran into was on housing type, because the data that's available for housing type isn't particularly good outside of the metro. And we also don't know if we have housing needs described for the past 10 years, how should we project that out into the future? Because do we want it to look the same as it's been, or should it look different? And that's really a policy question. And then on top of that, we have a lot of other considerations about perpetuating existing patterns of exclusion, developing a system that's transparent and provides avenues for feedback, those types of considerations, as well as how to deal with data-rich regions like the metro or RVCOG that have information on that is not available through ACS. And then finally, we have this kind of consideration around implementation and accountability. you know, one of the big things that we've identified is how much of a concerted statewide effort it's going to take to actually accommodate this housing need that we've identified over a 20-year time frame, especially considering so many will require public support and assistance. So one of the things we're really trying to think through is how do we develop a system of accountability that ensures jurisdictions are putting forward their best efforts to meet this housing need, while also simultaneously recognizing there's a lot of actors that need to come to the table: market rate actors, subsidized affordable developers, the state, federal policy. All of these things really need to come together if we're going to seriously meet this need. And so with that, that's just kind of a brief summary of some of the issues that we've been thinking through so far. I want to welcome questions and thinking through more about the methodology. OHCS has published a survey. I'm going to follow up with some materials after this meeting for folks who are really interested in that. But yeah, I think I can just open it up to questions now.
So, Mr. Chairman, we are right at the end of the time for this presentation, and I wonder, I know there's going to be a lot of questions. There's a lot of interest in this topic. So I wonder if we could share, well, I see Megan's and Sean's emails here on the screen. I wonder if folks could just reach out to them individually with their questions so we can have time for Cody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion, Carol. So let's share that information. And it sounds like there may be some information you both want to share. Maybe if there's some upcoming additional outreach opportunities you had mentioned, you might make sure to let Carol know about those so she can pass those along to the group as well.
Will do.
Some really great information. And yeah, I can see in the future, this is really going to impact a lot of the work that this committee does, because we deal with that future housing allocation stuff quite often. So I think that's something that would be great to have that additional outreach and input. So yeah.
And just as a quick note, Becky, I want to thank Becky Knudsen because she's been on the technical advisory committee for the RENA and has been involved in some other meetings. And as Sean mentioned, yeah, we'll be meeting with Metro, and I think maybe Sean in some of the other perhaps regional meetings or something else that would definitely be great to have some folks from this group have some input there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you again. Great presentations, a lot of information. And it's a challenging topic and a challenging road you guys have ahead of you here. So good luck with all of that. And I'm sure we'll have more conversations in the future with this group.
Yeah,
okay,
excellent.
Cody, if you want to talk about the Every Mile Counts work plan and some of the upcoming rulemaking that's going to be going on.
I'm going to share my screen here. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for hanging with us. I see there's still about 30 of you on the call here, so almost there. Yeah, my name is Cody Meyer. I'm a land use and transportation planner with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and I was asked to provide this committee with just a brief update on the Every Mile Counts and then DLCD's Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Update. I am not the expert. I'm just kind of the messenger here, but I have a couple experts I see on the call, and Tara Widener and Bill Holmstrom. So, you know, I hope that you two can help jump in here and fill in any gaps or, you know, add some commentary here. And Bill, if you're listening, I am using some of your slides from our webinar just yesterday. So, I'll start. I think most of you are probably pretty familiar now with the Every Mile Counts. I can't give too much detail as to what's going on in each specific bucket, but I can just kind of give a broad level overview. So we do have a web page. This is a 4-agency effort to implement the statewide transportation strategy. And we will be posting updates to this web page and giving folks a better idea of where to plug into the different silos of the work efforts. And so this is a Department of Transportation, Land Conservation and Development, Department of Energy, and then Department of Environmental Quality effort. So this is kind of the overall schematic here is that, you know, earlier this year, Governor Brown issued Executive Order 2004, which contains some requirements to really expedite our planning for climate change. And very specifically, 39% of emissions are coming out of the transportation sector. And we know from the good work that Tara and others had done in the monitoring report for STS is that we're not really making pace, and we need to pick up the slack. And so there's specific directives for these 4 agencies to work together to really put implementation of the STS at the highest level of the agencies. And so for the past year, our leadership has been working together, and we just this June, I think it was, came out with the 2-year work plan to implement the STS, and we've branded that as Every Mile Counts. And so, as many of you know, reducing emissions from transportation is the 3-legged stool. You need to reduce the amount of driving total that we're doing. You need to clean up the vehicles that are emitting the fuels. You need to electrify them and get higher mile per gallon. And then you need to decarbonize the fuel. So in recognition of that, these are the priority efforts that we came up with. And we've added that, we really need to consider emissions in the decisions we're making every day. We also have really recognized that we're not doing our best at integrating climate justice and equity considerations. And so that's kind of the main lens that I think a lot of this is going through. I'm just going to walk through a little bit, and I can speak pretty good about what our agency's up to, but please don't ask me any questions about DEQ or environment or energy. So yeah, the priority efforts within those buckets are that transportation options, we need to reduce VMT. So we're looking at Department of Environmental Quality doing a trip reduction policy similar to like the eco rule. I think that'll be going through that kind of paradigm up there. And then looking at some DLCD, looking at parking management strategies. And then of course, local greenhouse gas reduction planning. I'll primarily be talking about that a little bit later with our rulemaking. And so within that, we have kind of transportation planning and housing planning, doing some of our regional scenario planning to reduce greenhouse gases, and then looking at performance measures for local agencies. And so then I did mention DEQ is going to be beefing up the clean fuels program, looking at kind of like a medium heavy duty alternative fuel study, doing some emission standards upgrades, and then the ZEV requirements for trucks. Also DEQ, or I think it's ODO and ODOT doing a ZEV action plan, and then the transportation electrification infrastructure needs analysis, or the TINA study. So just overall, the agencies did roll out the work plan. They signed a memorandum of understanding, just committing to a bare minimum of this is going to be 10 years of heavy lifting. We're rolling out a short-term work plan. So every 2 years, the agencies will be coming up with, what are our priority efforts in this 2-year cycle. We're just kind of splintering off now into implementation teams. DLCD is working closely with ODOT on our rulemaking, and the various efforts will have different partnerships. Our directors and key staff are checking in regularly. We are holding standing items updates at all our commissions for those agencies that have a commission. Looking for accountability mechanisms, basically reporting back to our boss, the governor, how are we doing? And then really, like I said, having public engagement and equity as a lens. So I think that's, yeah, I'm going to go step through here a little bit. Apologies, I don't have this memorized yet. So DLCD is leading the Every Mile Counts effort of the local GHG reduction planning in partnership with ODOT. And so our brand here is the climate friendly and equitable communities. This is going to be rulemaking that encompasses about 4 divisions within our rulebook chapter. So we're doing, transportation planning rule, housing rules, a couple divisions there, and then our scenario planning and regional targets. Also looking at how parking fits into that. And so that might be kind of interspersed between those divisions. As I mentioned, Department of Energy is looking at this zero emission vehicle action plan. And so they're spearheading that. I think they have an RFP out right now. looking how we can get at a statewide look, you know, on track with our zero emission vehicle fleets. So DEQ, as I mentioned, is going to be looking at a statewide trip reduction policy similar to the ECO rule, and beefing that up. Their clean fuels program, expanding that, and then doing, you know, the heavy duty fuel study and ZEV requirements for trucks. ODOT, I don't know, Tara, do you want to jump in here? No.
Keep going, you're doing great.
All right. It's kind of hard to talk through other people's work when you're not involved in it. But basically, looking at this, the TINA study, I think they're hiring a consultant right now, going through the public advisory committee process, and basically looking at, like, you know, if we're going to get the electric vehicles that we need to get on track with our climate reduction goals, then, you know, how are people going to be plugging in? We're going to have to build out this infrastructure. And so what are we going to need and what's the roadmap to get there? And then coming up with performance measures to course correct and measure success. So I know I'm kind of blasting through this stuff for you guys, but I can try to answer some questions on the overall effort there. I think that in November, we're planning a webinar that the directors will be taking and key staff will be taking questions from the public from this work, and we'll be providing basically an update from each agency's perspective on what's going on, where to plug in, and then, you know, just taking basic questions. So that will be going out. You can sign up for, you know, Gov delivery updates, I think, through the Every Mile Counts website. And then, of course, you know, for our rulemaking, you can get on that Gov delivery as well.
We do have one question in the chat box. Alex is asking if pricing, is pricing a conversation for a different plan or agency, or is it included in this effort?
Yeah, I don't know. Alex, what kind of pricing are you talking about? Because I think a lot of that might be legislatively driven if we're talking about carbon pricing or social cost recovery pricing.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. So I guess maybe we're saying this is just kind of a recap of ongoing efforts as opposed to a plan in itself then?
So this is, the executive order was focused on executive level actions that we can be taking. And so, you know, I know that DEQ is working separate from this effort on doing the cap with no trade. I don't know much about that. But as far as, like, you know, some of the pricing schemes that are in the STS, as far as I know, I don't think that we're going there.
Okay, so it doesn't touch anything that, it doesn't like suggest things that are outside of an executive order power, like things to keep working on beyond that. It's very focused then, it sounds like.
Yeah, the overall Every Mile Counts plan is very focused. And if you're interested, they have the technical, I think it's the appendix to the work plan, has a really step-by-step, you know, exactly what each agency is looking at doing in the next 2 years. And my recollection is that there's not any pricing there. Of course, there's some actions like clean fuels or something that might have some incidental, you know, effects on pricing, but nothing specific.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to think how that message gets back. I mean, it's kind of the governor's job. So it's like, how do we tell them? It's like the agencies can do so much, but pricing is the biggest lever. Anyways, side topic, yeah. Separate topic.
And I would just chime in that this is a 2-year work plan and it's a 10-year overall, you know, commitment. So every 2 years there's a new work plan. I think, you know, when we did the STS, we did a near-term work plan. You picked off a few things that you're focusing on. You know, a few years later, you pick off a different set and continue some of the ones that haven't finished yet, right? So that doesn't preclude it from being in those future ones, but I think part of the struggle is, you know, who owns that, because an agency can't do that without legislative. And I think the Global Warming Commission also weighs in on these conversations and makes recommendations that are easier to swallow from their vantage point of outreach and messaging. So we're all kind of in a team here pushing this forward. But I think we do have a nice framework for the transportation overall that was set by the STS, the Statewide Transportation Strategy, back in 2013. And that's still sort of the guiding roadmap. And so the Every Mouse Counts is pulling off a few of those elements. But you're right, there's others that are still there. So we're going to have to keep going.
Well, to pivot Alex's remark into something that OMSC could consider as an organization, you know, this group contains a bunch of analysts who know from their own practice in many specific cases. Chris and I have actually done this work in the Seattle area, that roadway pricing would actually get you emissions reductions. And so we prepared an internal memo for Metro Council, but this is exactly the type of consultation that OMSC could provide if it wanted to. You know, you could do this and it would work.
So Jeff, are you suggesting that you could do some scenarios as a combined OMSC effort and then put those out there as to their effect?
Well, I just think that yeah, I mean, that's one way. You can envision, it would be nice if OMSC were asked by the appropriate authorities to do that work, but exactly. I mean, if we all ran a ubiquitous roadway pricing scenario and even a freeway only pricing scenario in our respective models as a scenario planning exercise, you could see what the mobile source emissions impact would be absent any other changes to fleet mix or vehicle efficiency or ZEVs, you know. And so that it's something that it's a topic, the topic of linking roadway pricing or transportation system pricing to the emissions question is something other regions have done. Oregon could choose to do that, which would be in addition to the cap and trade discussion.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, just so people know, we have already done that, right? I mean, the STS, that was a scenario where we were just looking at pricing. So I would, and this is one where I think we have to be careful, kind of to Alex's point. This is really talking about the executive order and the immediate stuff we're trying to move forward. And I think that the STS piece, we did cover that. And I have a feeling that that linkage will be there again, and I'm sure this topic will come up in some of the OTP and the OTP scenarioing efforts, some of this pricing conversation. So, so I think that would probably, those things are going to come out and play together moving forward. But to Alex's point, I think it's really good that we're going to have to make sure we know which thing we're talking about, because it could get confusing really fast for people if they're not as familiar with it, for sure.
We had also asked Cody to cover a little bit on the upcoming rulemaking process. So I wonder if we should move there since we're getting a little tight on time.
Yes. Good question. I mean, you guys all know it. It's the levers in the pocketbook. So yeah, a quick update on DLCD and ODOT's joint. Of course, it's our rule book, but ODOT's going to be partner here in this effort. So just last month in September, LCDC formally initiated rulemaking. If you've been following along, it's not a surprise. We've kind of towing up here for a while now. I put a link here to the rulemaking page, which will be getting updates. I think we're going to be announcing our advisory committee here shortly. So let's see. Yeah. Okay. A lot of words here. And I am taking some of this from Bill Holmstrom's presentation on our webinar that we put out. I think it was yesterday. Time's kind of blurring together these days, but that is also going to be on our website. It's for folks at the table here, probably nothing new. It was very just level setting and putting some sideboards on what we're going to be doing for some of the new RAC members. We do have a kind of very inclusive RAC this time, which means that we have a lot of people who have no idea about what our agency does and some of the wonky stuff that we kind of work on. So it's very much capacity building there. But I've just kind of highlighted some of the action words here. Of course, urgency, we all just kind of saw a month or so ago. We really needed to get on this. And this was our commission's desired outcomes. So yeah, specifically, we need to be reaching our climate pollution reduction targets for the regions. We need to be getting on board with the actions detailed in the statewide transportation strategy. In addition to a climate crisis, we also have a housing crisis. So we really need to increase housing choice and supplies. This is going to be a very comprehensive rulemaking in that regards. And thus we have Bill Holmstrom from the transportation side leading the project through, and then Kevin Young from our housing division, senior urban planner, as co-project manager to help us out with that. What we heard through outreach was, there really is a need for capacity building and the strength of relationships. This is an integrated effort. It's, all the way from federal to local and community-based organizations and health providers. Everyone kind of needs to work together. We really need to follow the lead of and have our process designed to accommodate the needs of impacted communities. Our commission is really interested in developing outcomes and metrics for equitable outcomes to achieve the climate pollution reduction. And then we need to come up with a process where we can define and create accountability. And so that really means that we're going to have to be monitoring and enforcing things as we go forward. So I'll just kind of walk you through the rulemaking charge. We went into this really in depth on that webinar, so if you're interested in more, there's probably about 10 more slides that I'm going to show you here. These are the ones I just kind of cribbed from. So the two categories are, we need to have land use and transportation planning regulations, and that's going to be prescriptive actions that we put into the rule amendments. And then second here is that we need to be requiring planning in metropolitan areas to meet their climate pollution targets. And those are in Division 44. So these actions are going to be guiding how local jurisdictions are planning for transportation and land use and how they implement those plans. It's one thing to have good plans. It's another thing to, build them out. So we want to make sure that we are in line there. Very specifically, what are the actions that we're looking at going to include? We need to find areas where people can live and work and don't pollute. We're calling them climate-friendly areas. And so we know that we need to get a lot of our housing in the future built in these centers and corridors in metropolitan cities. We need to require high-quality bike ped systems planning. And we know that we need to limit minimum off-street parking mandates. That doesn't say that you can't build parking. It's just that the government shouldn't be telling you how much parking you need to devote to the storage of an automobile. We feel like that is better left to the landowner and the developer community. We know that using V over C and level of service standards are resulting in plans that kind of focus on capacity building, either in the intersection or on the lanes. And so we need to limit the use of performance measures and plans that just focus solely on congestion. As I said, we need to prioritize and select projects that are in the plans that are reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then we're going to be doing a little bit of work trying to partner with Department of Energy and ODOT on looking at where land development codes can support EV charging infrastructure. Not really sure how and what that's going to look like, but we're open to ideas. And so that's going to be evolving. So in metropolitan areas specifically, we need to develop and adopt plans that meet the climate targets. In 2009 and 10, the legislature had LCDC adopt greenhouse gas reduction targets. I think I've presented to this group a couple times about that, and you guys should be familiar, to reduce GHG emissions from household transportation. And those have been voluntary outside of Metro. And so we've got a couple options on the table to do that. One is doing the scenario planning framework, which we've been doing, and another is doing a very performance monitoring approach that we're calling the baseline assessment. And what we would do is be basically gathering the inputs to the modeling process and comparing those to the STS vision trajectories. Within the STS, they had defined out for the years, 2040 to 2050, where regions should be on things like transit level of service. And so we can kind of use those as benchmark setting. And we're going to be developing that. So let's see. Okay, I'm getting a time check here. I'll blast through this last one, Carol. Yeah, so we need to come up with a process for adopting a regional plan outside of Metro. We realize that not everyone has a regional governance structure, so we're going to come up with some ideas to really focus this on the cities and counties and not so much the MPOs. We need to have interim requirements. We heard a lot of feedback that people were afraid that we're going to be doing scenario planning for another, 4 to 5 years and not getting to the stuff we need to be doing, that we know it's not rocket science what we need to be doing. So we really want to make sure that we are doing those prescriptive actions first. And scenario planning is something that could sit on top of those actions and then could add some flexibility for jurisdictions that would, say, well, we figured out a different pathway that we like better to get there. And so we'll be exploring some flexible options. And then, of course, the big thing here is reporting and monitoring progress. We need to know, where people are going and allow them to course correct as they go forward. And that is the end. So I think I just got out here by the hair of my chinny chin chin. Tara or Bill, do you have anything to add to that?
All right. Well, Thank you, Cody. I know that was I know that was trying to cover some very complicated topics very quickly. So I appreciate the range of information you covered.
Fast talker, so
yeah,
I could cover some ground.
So I would encourage folks to go ahead and feel free to contact Cody or Tara or Bill if you have any questions or inputs and thoughts on that. I know we only have a few minutes here, so I appreciate all the presentations. I thought they actually sort of linked pretty well together and may have been better in the order that we did them, sort of from that high level into the housing and then this work. So it'll be interesting to see how these all link up moving forward, because I think all these impact each other potentially quite significantly. So I do appreciate the time and effort you guys put into the presentations. Thank you. And with that, I think several items for the next meeting came out of this, Carol. We had those ones we talked about that Adam might bring back from the OTP. Were there other items that people would like to see discussed here, or ideas people have for that next meeting in April, thinking about where some of these other efforts that everybody's working on may be? Okay, hearing that, I know we only have yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I was waiting. I've been talking a lot today. I was waiting for others to speak, but I just wanted to ask if folks would be interested in having a group discussion about the future population forecasting we all have to do one way or another, given the fact that wildfires refocused, at least in my assessment, people's awareness of climate change. And we're starting to see, the New York Times ran a big article. There's going to be, I suggest, a resurgence of media thrashing of the question of whether climate change is going to drive in-migration to the Pacific Northwest higher. Of course, now we have some counter argument that maybe it'll actually be lower. But in the past, Metro had co-sponsored a symposium with UW and PSU and others to try to wrap some science around this. And I've asked Chris and his team to start thinking about this in anticipation of our own next urban growth boundary decision cycle, which is a few years out yet, but we're going to get ahead of it. So just, if people are interested in that, I'd be curious to, or we'd be willing to have more of a conversation, because it's not confined just to the Portland area. Generally, the popular meme is that the entire Pacific Northwest is a destination flight zone for both in Arizona. You've probably heard it all before.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was one that one of our previous commission chairs was really pushing, but we never got to, is sort of the climate refugee concept. So this could be something, Tara and Adam, we think about these OTP scale projects where we're looking at some of the scenario stuff to see if on a statewide level there's some scenario testing we do around that concept. So I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's a strategic level question, really, right? So for me, I think it's worth engaging in, and for ODOT, I would look probably Adam, for you to lead that with some of the others, right?
Well, yeah, I want us to keep this thread going. Let's put it that way.
And
Okay.
I can add that, I can dust off this research proposal that, Jeff, you at Metro were involved with PRC, and then some of our new tools like the population synthesizer we had talked, and this wouldn't be necessarily, it'd be sort of a strategic view, but using a lot of our more regional system level tools to look at, what are the possible scenarios, and also get at what's the data? Where are the gaps in our data? Do we need to track the DMV and how which states people are coming from, and when do we have thresholds and triggers that we get concerned about, and we need to do this. So I think I'll dust that off and share that with you. I'm not in a really capacity as much, I think, right now for me to take on any of that, but I think it's all still relevant.
Yeah, and that's why, Tara, I was thinking that could link back through with some of the strategic work we're kicking up with the OTP. That seems to me to be the linkage.
Yeah, so let me bring that back to Adam, which probably hasn't seen it as much, and Jeff as well.
Yeah,
then,
great.
The other thing is just Wes answered or asked a question that we didn't have time to have our guests presenting on the arena answer, but just wanted to offer that in parallel to the questions around climate change and its effect on migration, we're starting to think about how we will answer Wes's question. Like, okay, single family zoning is essentially gone statewide. So what's the market doing now? And we have a rich set of data that we've already used to attempt to understand redevelopment, since most of the land in our region most of the housing production is going to be redevelopment in our region. We know that already. So we're starting to look at that, and if others are interested in that topic as well, it may not be quite as top of mind to other regions as it is to us, but that's something else that
Okay, I think that makes sense, and there might be one, Becky, that you want to flag. It seems like that potentially could be an MPC subcommittee, maybe thinking about that. And I think some of these we can take to the next executive committee too, Carol, to see if they make sense to work into potentially the work plan, and where those would fall in the various subcommittees to do that deeper dive and then bring back something to the overall committee.
I just want to add, this is Cody. I'm really interested in that too. And I know there's a lot of interest in my agency about that, but not the capacity to do anything about it. The climate adaptation framework, the project manager for that effort, I've had some really great conversations with her about this very subject. And just, as planners, everything we do is predicated on the population forecast being right, So it's like, are we so sure about that? It makes sense that you do some kind of sensitivity test to see what the effects would be. Tara and Brian Hurley and I did some of this in our Campo project, where we did a climate refugee scenario where we doubled the population growth just to see what would happen. And, as long as we put them inside the existing land uses, everything got better except for congestion. So it was actually pretty.
Yeah. Absent of cost and economic drivers and whatnot. Yeah, that's a challenge. That's that whole conversation is really challenging. So, I was interested to see some of the housing policy folks who, they think about that next level, like some of the folks I saw on here, Dennis, you and Jeff and you guys. So bringing that other lens into that conversation will be really good. Well, I see it's time. Carol, did you want to do any wrap up or anything you wanted to do before we jump off?
I can't think of anything burning. I will post the presentations that we saw today to the OMSC Google folder, or excuse me, OMSC Google folder, and get you guys a link to that soon before the notes
Okay.
come out.
Great. And then I think at the exec committee, we'll think about some of these conversations and how to continue them. I really appreciate we had a lot of great participation today from some of the usual suspects and some new folks. So I appreciate that. And people hung around and were engaged in these conversations. So I'm glad to see the energy around the topics and the interest. Thank you.
So.
Good deal.
Okay. And with that, I'll say bye to everybody and have a good rest of your week.
Bye, everyone.
Good seeing you.
Thanks. Good
So
discussion.
long.